Do you remember what it meant to be a kid growing up in the 1950s? If you lived it, you know things a child today could never quite grasp. You know the sound of the milkman clinking bottles on the porch before sunrise. You know the smell of mimeograph ink on a fresh handout at school. You know what it felt like to run out the screen door in the morning and not come back inside until your mother called you home for supper. This is a walk back through 100 pieces of that world. The toys, the shows, the songs, the sidewalks, the small moments that made a childhood in the 1950s different from anything that came after. We are counting down from 100 to 1, and the rank climbs as the memories grow closer to the heart. Some will make you laugh, some will catch you in the chest. All of them belong to you if you lived them. Let us begin. Number 100. The ragman's cart clopping down the alley. Something moved past your back window on a summer morning that you have not heard in 50 years. It was the ragman, and his horse-drawn cart rattled slow down the alley behind the row of houses. The horse's hooves struck the brick with a clop that echoed off the garages, and the ragman called his trade in a long, weary voice that everyone on the block knew by heart. Old rags, bring out your old rags. His cart was piled high with what other people had thrown away. Bundles of worn cotton, coils of copper wire, an iron bed frame balanced on top like a small shipwreck. Your mother came out with a folded pillowcase full of scraps, worn shirt tails, and pants your father had finally given up on. She traded them for a nickel and a nod, and the ragman tucked her scraps into a burlap sack and moved on to the next yard. Every neighborhood had one. In some cities, he was the junk man, in others, the rag picker. He was a fixture of urban life for 100 years, part of a whole invisible economy that kept almost nothing from going to waste. Nothing about him was easy. His clothes were dirty because his work was dirty. His horse was thin because feed cost money. His nickels were counted one by one at the end of the day. Today, there are no ragmen in the alleys because there are no alleys behind most homes anymore, and nothing gets reused the way it did. Do you still remember the sound of those hooves? And can you picture what came down the chute right after him at number 99? Number 99. Coal chutes and winter deliveries into the basement. Every October, a big black truck backed up to the side of the house, and the driver hopped down with a canvas chute over his shoulder. He hooked it into the small iron door at the foundation, cranked open a hatch on the truck, and a river of anthracite came rushing down the chute in a black clattering roar that shook the whole basement wall. Your father stood watching to make sure the count was honest, and your mother closed the kitchen windows against the cloud of coal dust that always rose up from the delivery. That coal was your winter. It fed the octopus furnace in the basement that pumped steam heat up through the radiators, and it fed the coal stove in the kitchen where your mother baked bread on the coldest Saturdays. Every morning your father went down before dawn and shoveled a scoop into the hopper, and every night he banked the fire so it would still be alive at breakfast. The whole house smelled faintly of coal smoke, and if you walked outside in January, you could see it rising from every chimney on the block in tidy gray pillars. Coal did the work, but coal was hard. The ash had to be shoveled and hauled to the curb in metal cans. The lung of anyone who lived near a coal town paid a price nobody talked about. By the middle of the decade, oil burners were replacing coal in the newer neighborhoods, and by the 60s, the black truck stopped coming altogether. Do you remember the racket of that coal pouring down? And did your mother scrub laundry the same way they did at number 98? Number 98. Wringer washing machines in the kitchen corner. Monday was wash day, and the whole house knew it. Your mother rolled the Wringer washer out from the corner of the kitchen, filled its round white tub from the sink with a rubber hose, and lit the burner underneath to heat the water for the first load. In went the whites with a scoop of Rinso or Does, and the agitator started its slow, heavy sloshing that you could feel through the linoleum. The magic and the danger was the Wringer on top. Two rubber rollers that pressed the water out of each piece before it went into the rinse tub. She fed each shirt and sheet between the rollers with her fingers, a hair's breadth from being pulled in. And every mother in America knew a woman whose hand or elbow had been caught and crushed by one of those machines. There was even a safety release bar you slapped to stop the rollers, and children were told 100 times to stay clear of it. When the wash was done, she carried the wet laundry out to the clothesline in a wicker basket, wooden clothespins in her apron pocket, and hung everything to dry in the wind. The sheets came in smelling like the outdoors in a way no dryer has ever matched. The wringer washer did the work of 10 hours by hand, but it took a full day and a strong back to run. By 1960, automatic washers were becoming common in the suburbs, and the old wringer machines got rolled out to the garage. Do you still hear that agitator sloshing? And do you remember where your mother kept the ice for the icebox that used to sit at number 97? Number 97, the icebox that predated the electric fridge. Before the humming white refrigerator arrived in your kitchen, there was the icebox, a solid wooden cabinet lined with tin and packed with insulation, standing on 4 short legs in the corner. The top compartment held a block of ice the size of a small suitcase, and the bottom held everything you needed to keep cold. Milk in a glass bottle, butter on a plate, the leftover pot roast wrapped in wax paper. The Iceman came twice a week in a truck loaded with straw-packed blocks, and he checked the card in your kitchen window to see what size you needed today. 25 pounds, 50 pounds. He hoisted the block onto his leather shoulder pad with a pair of iron tongs and carried it straight into the kitchen without a word, dropping it into the top of the icebox with a solid wet thunk. Underneath there was a pan that caught the meltwater, and someone had to remember to empty it before it overflowed and ran across the floor. That was often your job. Children followed the Iceman down the block in summer, waiting for him to chip a small piece off the big block with his pick and hand it over as a treat. Ice held its ground into the early 50s in city apartments and country farmhouses alike, until electric refrigerators finally reached every neighborhood, and the Iceman drove off for the last time. The food stayed a little too warm. The pan overflowed if you forgot, but the ice was cold and honest, and it tasted like nothing else on a hot afternoon. Do you remember the tongs and the leather pad on his shoulder? And did the party line telephone at number 96 give away every one of your secrets? Number 96, party line telephones you shared with neighbors. You picked up the heavy black receiver in the front hall and heard voices already talking. Mrs. Kowalski from 2 doors down was ordering a Sunday roast from the butcher, and Mr. Peabody from the corner house was arguing with his brother in Detroit about a leaky roof. That was your party line, and half the block was on it with you. Rural areas often had 8 or 10 families sharing a single line. City neighborhoods had 2 or 4, and everyone learned to recognize each other's rings. Your family might be 2 long rings and a short. The Millers might be a short and 2 longs. You picked up only when you heard your ring, and if the line was busy, you hung up quiet and tried again in 10 minutes. Nobody trusted a party line with a secret. Everyone knew that if you covered the mouthpiece with a handkerchief and eased the receiver up slow, you could listen to whatever was being said. Teenagers whispered code words into it. Wives ended arguments early. Businessmen bit their tongues. There was a whole unwritten etiquette. You did not stay on for more than a few minutes when a neighbor was waiting, and you never made a call in the middle of a family emergency you had just overheard. Private lines existed, but they cost extra, and most working families made do with the party line into the early 60s. Slowly, the phone company ran enough wire to give everyone their own number, and the party line went quiet. Do you remember your ring pattern by heart? And did anything ever get done on the Sundays that number 95 shut down cold? Number 95, blue laws that shut everything down on Sundays. Sunday in the 1950s was not a shopping day. It was not really any kind of day for errands. The blue laws on the books in nearly every state and county closed the grocery, the hardware store, the department store, the movie theater in some counties, and the bar almost everywhere. Even the gas station shut its pumps at noon. The idea went all the way back to colonial Puritan Massachusetts, and it survived in law right through the Eisenhower years, because most Americans still went to church on Sunday morning and expected the rest of the day to belong to family. You woke up, put on your Sunday best, walked to services, came home to a big Sunday dinner your mother had prepared on Saturday, and spent the afternoon on the porch or driving out to visit relatives. If your family ran out of milk on Sunday afternoon, you drank water until Monday morning, or you knocked on a neighbor's back door and borrowed a cup. The blessing of blue laws was rest, a day when nothing was demanded of anyone. The whole town breathed at the same slow pace, and even the traffic on Main Street felt hushed. The hardship was practical. If Dad got a flat tire coming home from Grandma's, you sat in the car until Monday morning. If Mom cut her thumb slicing a tomato, she stitched it herself. Slowly, the laws were peeled back through the 60s as suburban malls opened and shopping habits changed. Sunday became just another day at the register. Do you still miss that stillness? And can you picture the salesman who came to your front door at number 94 with a case full of brushes? Number 94, the Fuller brush man at the front door. The knock came in the middle of a Tuesday morning, 3 sharp raps, and your mother wiped her hands on her apron and answered because she knew who it was. The Fuller brush man stood on the porch in a suit and tie, holding a black leather case the size of a small suitcase, and he greeted her by name because he had been serving that block for 9 years. He opened the case on the porch railing, and inside were hairbrushes, hand brushes, floor scrubbers, cobweb sweepers, kitchen bottle brushes, shoe brushes, bath brushes, whisk brooms, feather dusters, and jars of face cream and shampoo, each in its own little slot. He handed your mother a free vegetable brush as a gift for opening the door, and she looked over the case and picked out a new toilet brush and a jar of hand lotion. The Fuller Brush Company started in 1906 with one man selling brooms out of his sister's basement in Connecticut, and by the 50s, it had 10,000 salesmen walking American porches every week. The salesman knew your dog's name. He knew when the baby was born. He asked after your father's back. This was the last generation when a stranger could earn a living just by knocking on doors. The good was the small talk and the honest product. The hard was the long day of walking in leather-soled shoes, and the wife back home wondering when he would be paid. Television, advertising, and shopping malls chipped away at the door-to-door business through the 60s, and the Fuller brush man walked off the porch for the last time. Do you still remember his voice? And how did people ever wait long enough to see what number 93 was crossing the night sky? Number 93. Sputnik crossing the night sky in October 1957. The whole country walked outside on a cool October night in 1957 and looked up. Sputnik was passing overhead, a small polished metal ball no bigger than a beach ball, and it circled the Earth once every 96 minutes, trailing a signal you could hear on a shortwave radio if you tuned it right. Newspapers printed the schedule for when the satellite would be visible over your town, and families gathered on front lawns after supper to spot the moving dot of light drifting between the stars. A child in New Jersey, and a child in Kansas, and a child in Oregon all looked up at the same time at the same speck. The Soviets had done it first, and every adult you knew was rattled about what that meant. The next morning, the paper on your kitchen table had the word Sputnik in a headline 3 inches tall, and your father read the article twice before folding it and going to work. Schools scrambled to add more math and more science almost overnight. Congress funded the National Defense Education Act to catch up on physics and Russian and calculus. Every kid who was any good at arithmetic got singled out for after-school programs that had not existed the week before. The good of Sputnik was the wonder of it. The moment a whole generation looked up and realized space was real. The hard was the cold sweat of falling behind an enemy, and the sudden pressure on 10-year-olds to become the engineers who would answer the Russians. Do you still remember pointing at that moving dot? And how many bottles of ink did you empty into number 92 before your handwriting got clean? Number 92. Fountain pens and glass inkwells. Your desk at school had a small round hole cut into the top right corner where a glass inkwell sat, and inside that inkwell was a puddle of Waterman's blue black that would stain a shirt for life. The teacher walked the aisles with a bottle to refill the wells every morning before penmanship, and you dipped the nib of your fountain pen into it with careful precision to load the barrel. If you filled it too far, you leaked. If you loaded too little, you scratched dry across the paper midward. Your Parker or Schieffer pen was a serious tool, often a gift for finishing 8th grade or making confirmation, and you learned to hold it at the exact angle that let the ink flow smooth without sputtering. Left-handed children had it worst because they dragged their hand right through the wet ink, and came home with their sleeves smeared blue. Ink got everywhere. On fingers, on cuffs, on the wooden desktop, on the pages of the weekly reader. There was a boy in every third-grade classroom who dropped his pen and cracked the nib and cried because his father had spent $5 on it. The good of the fountain pen was that it taught a slow, careful hand, and the writing that came out was beautiful. The hard was the stain that never came out of a shirt, and the smudge on every homework page. Ballpoint pens had been around since the 40s, but they finally got cheap and reliable in the middle of the 50s, and the inkwell was gone from most desks by 1960. Do you still remember the smell of that ink? And did you brave the needle at number 91 when the nurse came to school? Number 91, the Salk polio shot given right in the school gym. They lined the whole third grade up along the wall of the gymnasium, and the doctor and the nurse waited at a folding table with a tray of glass syringes. Polio had terrified every parent in America through the whole first half of the 50s. Summer after summer, children who were fine in June came down with a fever in July and never walked again. The iron lung, that great steel tube where children lay for years unable to breathe on their own, was in every newsreel and every parent's nightmare. Then in 1955, Jonas Salk's vaccine was announced, and the whole country wept. The following school years, the shots came to your gym. You stood in line trying to look brave, watching each classmate step up and get the needle. Some fainted, some cried, some walked back to their seat with their sleeve rolled up like a soldier home from war. Your parents had signed a permission slip weeks before and paid nothing, because most communities gave the vaccine free, funded by the March of Dimes, and its dime store cards you had filled with coins the year before. The good of that shot was almost too big to say. It was the end of the disease that stole a generation. By 1961, the oral Sabin vaccine on a sugar cube replaced the needle, and polio faded from American life. The hard was the fear that came first, and the memory of the friend who had gotten sick the summer before and was never quite the same. Do you still remember rolling your sleeve up? And did the Sears Wish book you were waiting for at number 90 show up on time that autumn? Number 90, the Sears Wish book arriving in autumn. Sometime in early September, the postman dropped a thick catalog on your front porch that weighed more than your baby brother, and every kid in the house fought over who got it first. The Sears Christmas Wish book was 180 pages of pure toys, trains and dolls and bicycles, and cap guns and BB guns and chemistry sets, and cowboy outfits and easy-bake ovens, page after glossy page in full color, while the rest of the year the regular Sears catalog was still black and white. You lay on the parlor rug on your stomach and turned each page slowly, memorizing the model numbers of the things you were going to ask Santa for. You circled with a pencil what you wanted. You dog-eared the corners. You showed your mother and pointed. The Wish book had started in 1933 as a way for Sears to reach into towns too small for a store, and by the 50s, it was the single most influential magazine in American childhood. Country kids and city kids both knew it cover to cover by Thanksgiving. Your parents used it to plan the whole Christmas budget, and half the presents under the tree came straight out of its pages. The good of the Wish book was the dreaming. Nothing on television could compete with turning those pages by yourself in a quiet room. The hard was that most of what you circled you never got, because a Lionel train set cost a full week of your father's wages. The Wish book kept coming until 2011 when Sears finally stopped printing it. Do you still remember the toy you circled the most? And did the telephone in the hall at number 89 ever ring for you? Number 89. Rotary dial telephones you had to wait to spin back. The telephone in your house was black and heavy, and it sat on a small table in the front hall on a doily your grandmother had crocheted. The dial was a metal wheel with 10-finger holes, and to call your best friend you stuck your index finger in the hole for her first number, spun the wheel clockwise until it stopped against the metal stop, and let it spring back with a soft whirring click. Then you did that for every one of the 7 digits, and if you slipped or hit the wrong hole, you had to hang up and start over. A long-distance call could take a full minute just to dial. If the operator wanted the number you started with the exchange name, Butterfield 8, Murray Hill 5, Klondike 7, Those two letters were the first two digits of the number spelled out on the dial, and they made every phone number feel like a small poem. Long distance was expensive, so you spoke fast when it was Grandma calling from Cleveland, and the whole family lined up in the hall to say their turn. There was no answering machine. If nobody was home, the phone just rang into an empty house and the caller gave up. The good of the rotary phone was the weight of it in your hand and the ritual of the dial. The hard was the 7-digit wait and the busy signal that meant your friend was already talking to somebody else. Push-button touch-tone phones started reaching homes after 1963, and the rotary dial slowly disappeared through the 70s. Do you still remember your childhood phone number by heart? And did your family have a car big enough to match the tail fins at number 88? Number 88. Cars with tail fins bigger than your bedroom. Your father drove a two-tone Chevy Bel Air with a white top and a coral pink body, and the fins in the back rose up like the sails of a sloop. It was 1957, and every car in America looked like a rocket ship. The Cadillac Eldorado had the biggest fins ever put on a production car, tall enough to slice a low tree branch, with twin bullet taillights burning red at the tips. The Plymouth Fury, the Dodge Custom Royal, the Buick Century, all of them wore chrome and fins and swept back lines. That made them look like they were doing 80 parked in the driveway. Inside, the cars smelled like new leather and old cigar smoke. The bench seats stretched from door to door, and a family of 6 could ride comfortably, with the little one standing up in the back. The steering wheels were the size of dinner plates, and the horns played a chord. Chrome hood ornaments were as big as trophies. The good of these cars was the pride. When your father pulled into the driveway of your grandparents' house in a brand new Chevy, the whole block came out to look. The hard was the gas mileage, which was terrible, and the safety, which was none. No seat belts, no airbags, dashboard steel that would cut you in half in a crash. By 1962, the tail fins were shrinking, and by 1965 they were gone from Detroit's drawing boards. Do you still remember riding shotgun with your dad? And can you smell the caramel corn prize that came in the box at number 87? Number 87. Cracker Jack prizes at the bottom of the box. You reached your hand down into the sticky sweet caramel-coated popcorn and peanuts and fished around until your fingers closed on the small paper packet at the bottom. That was the prize. And every box of Cracker Jack in the 50s came with one. Tiny plastic soldiers, metal magnifying rings, miniature books you could actually read, whistles made of tin, charms shaped like animals, baseball cards printed on paper so thin they crinkled in your palm. Some of those cards, the 1948 and 1949 Cracker Jack sets, are worth a small fortune now if you saved them, and almost nobody did because you were 7, and it was a piece of paper. The tradition went back to 1912, and the Sailor Jack and Bingo the dog on the box had been the mascots since 1918. A box cost a nickel at the corner store, and you begged your mother for one every time she went shopping. The good of the prize was the little jolt of joy at the bottom of the box, the reward for eating your way through. The hard was that half the popcorn was actually peanuts, and if you didn't like peanuts, you had to pick them out. And the caramel coating stuck to the roof of your mouth like glue. Cracker Jack still exists, but the prizes went digital in 2016. There is no more little paper packet at the bottom. Do you still remember what prize you kept the longest? And did you carry your peanut butter and jelly to school in the tin can at number 86? Metal lunch boxes with a thermos rattling inside. Your lunch box was a small metal suitcase with a dome top, and the outside was painted with a picture that told the whole world what you loved. Roy Rogers on his Palomino trigger, the Lone Ranger raising his silver bullet, Hopalong Cassidy in his black hat, Dale Evans and Buttermilk, Superman flying over Metropolis, Howdy Doody grinning between his freckles. Your mother packed you a bologna sandwich wrapped in wax paper, an apple, 2 Oreo cookies, and a thermos of milk that clanked against the metal walls every time you swung the box on the walk to school. The thermos was glass on the inside, silvered like a mirror, and if you dropped the lunch box, the whole vacuum flask shattered, and you spent the afternoon eating a soggy sandwich and drinking nothing. Every kid learned to walk gentle. The first lunch box with a licensed character on it was the Hopalong Cassidy in 1950, and it sold 600,000 units in its first year and started a whole industry. By 1955, you could not walk into a Woolworths without seeing 30 different lunch boxes on the shelf. The good of the lunch box was the identity. It told the world what show you loved and who you wanted to be. The hard was the dented corners after a year of drops, and the thermos that never quite worked right. In 1972, Florida banned metal lunch boxes in schools because a first grader had used one as a weapon, and the plastic ones took over. Do you still have yours in the attic? And did you have to write your name 100 times a day for the drill at number 85? Palmer Method penmanship drills. Miss Henderson stood at the front of the room and clapped her hands to a slow, steady beat, and 30 children pushed their pens across the paper in unison, making perfect loops and slants. This was the Palmer Method, the standard American handwriting curriculum from the turn of the century through the 60s, and every school child in the country practiced it for an hour a day. You learned to hold the pen with a light grip, to move the whole arm from the shoulder rather than just the fingers, and to keep the paper tilted at exactly the right angle. Ovals, push-pulls, endless rows of connected E's rolling across the page like waves. The teacher walked the rows and tapped the shoulder of any child who was hunching, and she pulled the paper from any child whose letters slanted the wrong way. The report card had a separate grade just for penmanship, and a poor mark there was as serious as a poor mark in arithmetic. Boys hated it more than girls because they wanted to be outside. The good of the Palmer Method was that when you were done, you had a hand that could write a beautiful letter for the rest of your life. Look at any Christmas card from an aunt over 80, and you can see it. The hard was the sheer boredom of the drill, and the shame if your loops were sloppy. By the 70s, handwriting instruction had been reduced to a fraction of what it once was, and today most schools barely teach cursive at all. Do you still write in that old Palmer hand? And did the paper you passed at number 84 bring the news of the whole country to your classroom? The Weekly Reader passed down the row. Every Friday morning, a stack of thin newspapers came sliding down the row from the front of the classroom, and each child took one and passed the rest back. That was the Weekly Reader, a 4-page current events paper written for kids that had been printed since 1928 and reached almost every elementary school in America by the 50s. There were different editions for each grade, so the 2nd grade paper had big print and stories about animals, and the 6th grade paper had smaller print and stories about Sputnik and the Suez Canal and the new subway line in Cleveland. On the back was always a puzzle, a word search or a hidden picture, and the teacher gave you the last 15 minutes of the period to read the whole thing quietly at your desk. It was the first newspaper most of you ever held in your hands. Kids talked about the Weekly Reader on the bus home. You showed it to your parents at supper. You saved a whole year of them in a folder because it felt important. The good of the Weekly Reader was that it made the wider world real to a small child sitting in a classroom in a small town. You knew about a hurricane in Florida because the Weekly Reader told you. The hard was that it always came on Friday, and it was the last thing before the weekend. So half the class was staring out the window. Weekly Reader kept publishing until 2012, when it was folded into Scholastic. Do you remember the smell of that thin newsprint? And did the purple ink at number 83 ever come off your hands before Monday? Mimeograph handouts still damp with purple ink. The teacher walked down the aisle and dropped a fresh sheet of paper on your desk, and the first thing you did was hold it up to your nose. That was mimeograph ink, and every child in America in the 50s recognized the smell instantly. Sharp, slightly sweet, chemical, unforgettable. The paper was cool and slightly damp, and the purple letters were a little smudged if the machine had run too fast. Your teacher had spent her lunch hour turning the crank on that mimeograph machine down in the office. She had typed the master on a wax stencil in the morning, wrapped it around the drum, poured in the fluid, and cranked out 30 copies for the afternoon quiz. Some schools had a fancy new Spirit duplicator that used alcohol instead of ink, and those handouts smelled even stronger and made a few kids lightheaded if they sniffed too deep. The good of the mimeograph was that it put a copy of anything in every child's hand for the cost of a stencil, and it made possible whole worksheets and quizzes that a chalkboard could not. The hard was the mess, the smudging, and the fumes that gave the janitor a headache. Xerox photocopiers were invented in 1959, but they were huge and expensive, and mimeographs held on in schools well into the 70s. When photocopies finally took over, a small daily ritual disappeared. The moment 30 children pressed their nose to a fresh purple page. Do you still smell it in your memory? And did the milk in the tiny glass bottles at number 82 ever come warm on a Tuesday morning? School milk in half-pint glass bottles. At 10 o'clock a little bell rang, and the milk monitor stood up. He walked to the coat closet, pulled out the wire crate of half-pint glass bottles that had been delivered fresh that morning by the milkman, and passed one to each child at their desk. 2 cents. 3 cents by the middle of the decade. Chocolate cost an extra penny if your school offered it, and you brought your dime on Monday for the whole week. The bottles were squat and heavy, with a cardboard cap you had to pry off with your thumbnail, and if it was cold outside, the milk on top had a thin skin of cream that you either loved or hated. On a hot September afternoon, the milk sat too long in the crate and got just warm enough to be gross, and you drank it anyway because your mother had paid for it. The straws were paper and they collapsed halfway through, so you learned to sip fast. There were farm subsidies and school lunch programs behind that milk that most kids never knew about. The federal school milk program started in 1940 and was expanded again in 1954, and it kept dairy farmers in business as much as it kept children fed. The good was the calcium, the routine, and the small pleasure of a mid-morning break. The hard was the warm days and the paper straws. By the 70s, the little glass bottles were replaced by cardboard cartons everywhere, and the whole ritual of the milk monitor faded. Do you still remember the clink of those bottles in the crate? And did the wooden desks at number 81 leave a splinter in more than one thumb? Wooden desks bolted to the floor. Your desk was oak, dark with the varnish of 30 years, and it was bolted right through the floorboards in a row with all the others. The seat was attached to the back of the desk in front of you, so the whole line was a chain of children locked in place. On top, there was a shallow trough for pencils, a hole in the corner for the inkwell, and a hinged lid that lifted up to reveal a compartment for your books and your Big Chief tablet, and the balled-up sweater you had forgotten to take home in March. Under the desktop somewhere, if the desk was old enough, there was almost certainly a piece of dried chewing gum left by a kid in 1923. Boys carved their initials into the wood with the point of a pencil compass. Teachers walked the rows with rulers and rapped the knuckles of anyone slouching, and the whole classroom smelled faintly of pencil shavings and the oil the janitor used on the floor. The good of the fixed desk was the order. Everyone faced front, everyone stayed in place, nothing moved. The hard was that if you were a tall child stuck in a desk sized for a short one, your knees banged the underside for the whole year. And if you were left-handed, the desk was designed for right-handed people, and your elbow hung off the edge. Movable desks and chairs took over most classrooms in the 60s, as teachers began to arrange kids in circles and groups. Do you still remember carving your initials? And did the drill at number 80, when the siren blew, send you diving under that desk? Duck and cover drills under those desks. Number 80. Duck and cover drills under those desks. An air raid siren wailed through the school building, and the teacher called out the command in a calm voice she had rehearsed. Duck and cover. Every child slid off the seat, dropped to hands and knees, and crawled under the wooden desk that had just felt so cramped a minute before. You pulled your knees to your chest, tucked your head between them, and covered the back of your neck with both hands. Bert the Turtle had shown you how in the cartoon they had made you watch in the auditorium. He pulled his head into his shell, and everything would be all right. This was the Cold War, and every schoolchild in America practiced surviving an atomic bomb once a month. In some schools, they issued dog tags, so your parents could identify your body. In others, they marked the basement as a fallout shelter and stocked it with civil defense crackers and drums of drinking water. Air raid sirens sat on top of every fire station in the country, and were tested at noon on the first Wednesday of every month. Nobody talked about what a desk would actually do if a hydrogen bomb went off 6 blocks away. The good of the drill was that it gave adults something to do about a fear that nothing would fix, and it gave children a small ritual of control. The hard was the fear itself, the low, steady hum of it under every school day. The drills faded by the mid-60s as fatalism about the bomb settled in. Do you remember the sound of that siren? And can you still hear the erasers clapping outside after school at number 79? The front wall of every classroom was a long slate chalkboard, and running the whole length of the tray below, it was a row of felt erasers gone gray with a decade of chalk dust. Every teacher had a favorite kid to pick as the eraser monitor at the end of the day. Being picked meant you got to stay 10 minutes after the bell, gather up all the erasers in your arms, carry them out to the back of the school, and beat them together until a cloud of white dust rose into the afternoon light and settled on your school shoes. It was the best job in the whole classroom. The worst part of that job was the sneeze fit that followed, and the fine coat of chalk in your eyelashes when you went home. The blackboard itself was where every lesson happened. Diagrams of long division, maps of the states, sentence diagrams with dotted lines, spelling words in the teacher's steady loops. The chalk squeaked when she pressed too hard, and every classroom had one kid who could stand the sound, and one who plugged both ears the second it started. The good of the chalkboard was the physicality of it. You watched a lesson appear letter by letter in front of you. The hard was the dust that settled on everything and got into the lungs of teachers who spent 40 years in front of one. Whiteboards arrived in the 70s, but chalkboards held on in older schools for another 20 years. Do you still remember being picked for eraser duty? And did the bell at number 78 ring for you at the sweetest moment of the day? 25 minutes twice a day. That was recess, and it was the reason you got out of bed to go to school at all. The playground was a patch of dirt and a set of monkey bars and a metal slide that got hot enough in September to burn your legs. There were no wood chips. There was no rubber matting. If you fell off the swings, you hit packed earth or gravel and you got up and kept playing. Boys played kickball or dodgeball or pretended to be commandos. Girls played jump rope or hopscotch or house in the far corner. The teacher on yard duty stood by the door with a coffee mug and watched, but rarely intervened. Somewhere in the middle of the best moment, the biggest laugh, the last chance at the tetherball, the bell rang from the doorway and everybody froze. 50 children turned toward the sound at the same instant. Then a slow shuffling walk back to the line. The game abandoned mid-play. The score never settled. The good of recess was the 25 minutes of pure freedom, the closest thing to summer inside a school day. The hard was the bell that always came too soon, and the misery of being called in from the good weather to sit at a desk. The equipment got safer through the 60s. The yards got smaller, and the free-for-all of 50s recess is barely recognizable in a modern school. Do you still remember the exact sound of that bell? And did you ever roll a shooter at number 77 that scattered the whole ring? You crouched down in the schoolyard dirt in your Sunday second-best pants and drew a circle 3 feet across with the edge of your shoe. Everyone dropped in their target marbles, cat's eyes and steelies and clearies, and the beautiful swirled aggies you had traded 3 cat's eyes for. Then you took your shooter, that special big marble kept in a leather pouch in your pocket, tucked it behind your thumbnail and let it fly. If you knocked a marble out of the ring, you kept it. That was playing for keeps, and the losers watched their treasures leave the ring one at a time to disappear into the winner's pouch. Some teachers banned playing for keeps because it was really gambling, and the kids who lost their whole collection came home crying. Some parents forbade it for the same reason. Boys had elaborate hierarchies of marbles ranked by size, color, and rarity. A pure white shooter was worth 10 cat's eyes. A steel ball bearing traded like currency. There was a whole vocabulary: fudging, knuckling down, playing keepsies. The good of marbles was the concentration, the eye, the low, careful crouch, the small physics lesson in every shot. The hard was the dirt in your knees, the pants your mother yelled about, and the tears when your best Aggie rolled the wrong way. Marbles slowly disappeared from playgrounds in the 70s and 80s, as video games took over the after-school hours. Do you still remember the weight of your favorite shooter? And did you bounce the ball high enough on the porch stoop at number 76? You sat cross-legged on the top step of the front porch, with the little metal jacks scattered on the flat concrete in front of you. Your rubber ball was in one hand. You tossed it up gentle, snatched a jack off the concrete, caught the ball before it bounced twice. That was onesies, then twosies, then threesies, all the way up to tensies, picking up more jacks each round while the ball rose and fell in one steady rhythm. You had to breathe with it. The jacks themselves were six-pointed little iron stars, painted red or blue or gold, and they came in a small drawstring bag with a rubber ball the size of a walnut. A set cost 15 cents at the Woolworths. Girls dominated jacks. Boys played sometimes, but the reputation was fixed. Every summer afternoon you could hear the click of jacks and the small thud of the ball on porches up and down the block. Older girls taught younger sisters. Grandmothers who had played jacks in 1910 remembered every rule. There were fancy versions. Around the world, pigs in the pen, double bounces. The good of jacks was the meditative focus. 20 minutes could pass and you never looked up. The hard was the pointed jacks that hurt like fire if you knelt on one, and the ball that bounced off the porch and rolled into the sewer, ending the game for good. Jacks faded from the porches by the 70s, as sidewalks got scarcer and porches got smaller. Do you still remember the click of them scattering? And did you ever learn the whole rhyme at number 75 without missing a beat? Two girls turned the long clothesline rope in the middle of the sidewalk, one on each end, and a third jumped in the middle, her feet slapping the concrete in time to the chant. Cinderella, dressed in yellow, went upstairs to kiss a fella, made a mistake and kissed a snake. How many doctors did it take? Then the count went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and the rope swung faster and faster until you tripped and it was the next girl's turn. Every rope had a name and a rhyme. Miss Mary Mack, all dressed in black, down in the valley where the green grass grows. Teddy bear, turn around. There was double dutch with two ropes turning in opposite directions, and a set of foot crossings that took years to master. And there was regular jump with one rope, and the whole neighborhood's daughters lined up to take their turn. Boys usually did not play. They stood on the sidewalk and pretended not to watch. The good of jump rope was the endurance, the rhythm, the memorization of long, ridiculous rhymes that got passed from big sister to little sister down a whole generation. The hard was the rope burn if you missed, and the rope snapped your shins, and the falling out with your best friend if she turned the rope too fast on purpose. Jump rope survived longer than most schoolyard games and is still played today, though not with the elaborate chants that once passed from one block to the next. Do you still remember your favorite rhyme? And did the chalk grid at number 74 still show up in the rain? You drew the grid in white schoolyard chalk on the flat sidewalk in front of your house, and every kid on the block knew the exact shape by heart. 1 square, 2 squares side by side, 1 square, 2 squares, 1 square, then a half circle at the top for home. Numbers 1 through 10 in each square, sometimes with the numbers drawn upside down when a 5-year-old did the honors. Your marker was a flat stone or a wooden token or a piece of broken bottle worn smooth by the pavement, and you threw it to land in the square you were aiming for. Then you hopped the whole grid on 1 foot through the single squares and both feet through the doubles, picked up your marker on the way back, and started over on the next number. If you stepped on a line, you were out. If your marker missed the square, you were out. The good of hopscotch was that it needed nothing but a piece of chalk and a stone. The whole game was drawn fresh every day. It taught balance and counting and patience. The hard was that a summer rain washed the whole grid away by morning, and you had to draw it again from scratch. The variations went on forever. Snail hopscotch spiraled into a center. French hopscotch had a different pattern of throws. Every neighborhood had its own house rules. Hopscotch is still played in schoolyards, but the block-long chalk grids are mostly gone. Do you remember your favorite marker stone? And can your fingers still weave a spider at number 73? Number 73. Cat's cradle strings passed hand to hand. A single loop of household string about 4 feet long, tied at the ends, and 2 children facing each other across the kitchen table. The first girl looped the string around her hands in the starting position, palms facing, string running across the palms and around the little fingers. Then she wove her middle fingers up and under and pulled the pattern into the shape called cat's cradle, a symmetrical grid with 4 X's in the middle. The second girl reached in, pinched the crossings, lifted them over the outsides, and pulled the string into the next shape called soldier's bed. Then the diamond, then the fish in the dish, then cat's whiskers. The whole thing was a silent game. A moving sculpture passed back and forth between 2 pairs of hands until somebody made a wrong move and the string collapsed into tangles. There was no board, no dice, no board pieces, nothing to lose or break. The game was as old as string itself, played in every culture on Earth, and American kids learned it from their older sisters and grandmothers. The good of cat's cradle was the quiet focus of it, the small joy of watching a shape appear between your hands. The hard was that if the string was too short or too long, the shapes did not come out right, and if you rushed the transfer, the whole cradle collapsed. Cat's cradle still exists, but the parlor tradition of playing it for whole afternoons is gone. Do you still remember the pattern? And did you ever walk the dog with the yo-yo at number 72 under the porch light? Number 72. Yo-yo tricks like walk the dog and around the world. The Duncan Yo-Yo Company sent teams of demonstrators to every American town in the 50s, and when they showed up in front of the drugstore or the schoolyard, every kid dropped what he was doing and ran over. The demonstrator was usually a Filipino man in a crisp white shirt, because the modern yo-yo tradition had come from the Philippines, and Duncan had hired the world's best throwers to travel and teach. He tossed his yo-yo down and made it sleep at the end of the string for 10 full seconds while the string hung slack. Then he walked it across the sidewalk. Then he spun it around his head in the big loop called Around the World. Then he rocked the baby, threading it through a cradle of string. Then he ended with a flourish, and every kid begged his mother for a Duncan butterfly or an Imperial or a genuine right there on the spot. A wooden yo-yo cost 50 cents. Practicing was solitary and endless. You worked on your sleeper for a week straight until you could pull it back up without a hitch, and then you moved on to walk the dog, and then to loop the loop. Skinned knuckles were part of the deal. The good of the yo-yo was the mastery. Every kid could get better with practice, and every trick was earned. The hard was the string that broke and the yo-yo that flew across the yard and hit somebody's cat. Duncan went bankrupt in 1965, but by then a whole generation had learned to make one spin. Do you still remember your best trick? And did the hula hoop at number 71 wear a groove in your hips one summer? Number 71. Hula hoops sweeping through every backyard in 1958. In the summer of 1958, the Wham-O Company introduced a plastic hoop 3 feet across, priced it at $1.98, and sold 25 million of them in the first 4 months. Every kid on every block in America had one. You spun it around your waist and jerked your hips in a small, tight rhythm to keep it going, and you counted the seconds as it turned. 10, 30, a minute, 2 minutes. Then it slid down your legs and clattered to the grass, and you started over. There were competitions on the front lawns of the neighborhood, kids in a wide circle, timing each other with a wristwatch. The record on your block might be 6 minutes without a stop. The world record was already hours. Adults tried it too and threw their backs out. The Wham-O hoop was not the first hoop toy. Wooden hoops had been rolled with sticks in Victorian playgrounds, and ancient Greek children had done the same. But the plastic hoop was the sensation because it was cheap and colorful, and any child could master the basic move in an afternoon. The good of the hula hoop was that it got a whole generation of kids moving in a summer that had been all about sitting in front of the television. The hard was the sore hips at the end of the day and the sunburn on your shoulders. By 1959, the fad had peaked, and warehouses full of unsold hoops sat gathering dust. Do you still remember the exact color of yours? And did the slinky at number 70 walk the whole flight of stairs at your grandmother's house? Number 70, Slinky walking down the stairs. A naval engineer named Richard James dropped a spring off a shelf in 1943 and watched it walk end over end across the floor. And by Christmas of 1945, his wife Betty had named it the Slinky and put 400 of them on the shelves of Gimbel's in Philadelphia. All 400 sold in 90 minutes. 10 years later, every child in America knew the sound. A soft metallic zipping as the coils fell one over the other. You set your Slinky at the top of the stairs at your grandmother's house, gave it a little push, and watched the whole spring flip end over end down step after step in a fluid metallic wave. You sat at the bottom, counting the steps out loud and cheering when it made it all the way to the landing. 2 flights was the record. If a step was too tall, the Slinky stopped dead. If 2 coils got kinked, it never worked right again. The good of the Slinky was that it did one thing well. It walked. It cost $1. It fit in a coat pocket, and it entertained a bored child for hours. The hard was that it snarled beyond repair the first time a little brother yanked on it. And once it kinked, it was garbage. James Industries kept making them, and by the 60s over 100 million had been sold. The theme song from the 1962 commercial is still stuck in the head of everyone who was 5 in the 50s. What walks downstairs, alone or in pairs? Do you still hear the tune? And did you lift the Sunday funnies with the pink stuff at number 69? Number 69, Silly Putty lifting Sunday comics off the page. Peter Hodgson bought the rights to a failed synthetic rubber compound in 1949, packaged it in small plastic eggs, and put it on the shelf as a novelty toy for adults. Within a year, kids had discovered it, and by the 50s, every child had one of those little pink eggs on the shelf. You opened it and pulled out the soft pink ball inside, warmed it in your palms, and watched it stretch and bounce and drip. The great trick was that if you pressed a flat piece of Silly Putty onto the newspaper comics, the ink came right off onto the putty, and you could stretch a picture of Blondie or Dick Tracy or Beetle Bailey until it distorted into a funhouse mirror version of the character. You bounced Silly Putty on the floor, and it bounced back like a rubber ball. You pulled it slowly and it stretched like taffy. You pulled it fast and it snapped in two. You molded it into shapes, and it held for a minute before slumping back into a puddle. The good of Silly Putty was that it was 3 toys in one: a bouncer, a stretcher, a copier. The hard was that the pink egg attracted lint and dog hair, and once your Silly Putty was full of carpet fuzz, it never came clean. If your little sister mashed it into her hair, your mother spent an hour with a jar of peanut butter and a comb. Silly Putty is still sold today in the same plastic egg. Do you still have one in a drawer? And was Mr. Potato Head at number 68 stuck into a real spud when you were little? Number 68. Mr. Potato Head stuck into a real potato. In 1952, the Hassenfeld Brothers Company put a small box on the toy store shelf containing 30 plastic pieces: eyes, ears, noses, mouths, hats, mustaches, glasses, arms, feet, all with sharp little pins on the back so you could stick them into a vegetable. The vegetable was not included. You went to the pantry, got a russet potato out of the sack, and pushed the pieces into it wherever you wanted. Mr. Potato Head was the first toy ever advertised on television. An important moment, because it proved that TV ads aimed directly at children could sell a product without the parents ever hearing about it. Sales exploded. Kids drove their mothers crazy demanding potatoes for toys. A month later, the potato started to rot on the shelf. The pieces fell out with a wet plop, and your mother threw the whole thing in the trash with a small shudder. The good of Mr. Potato Head was the imagination. You could make him a pirate with an eye patch and a hat, or a farmer with glasses and a pipe. You could make him look like your uncle. The hard was the rotten potato and the sharp pins that hurt when you stepped on one. In 1964, the company added a plastic potato body, so children stopped begging for spuds, and the toy has been in production ever since. Do you remember making him look like a relative? And did the pile of logs at number 67 cover the whole parlor rug at Christmas? Number 67. Lincoln Logs building forts on the parlor rug. The tin drum on the toy shelf held 200 small dark wooden logs with notches cut in the ends, and every winter afternoon of your childhood, you spilled them out on the parlor rug and built. Lincoln Logs had been invented in 1916 by John Lloyd Wright, the son of the architect Frank Lloyd Wright, and they had been in every American toy chest for decades by the time you got to them. The instructions on the tin drum showed you how to build a small log cabin with a peaked green roof, but every child figured out within an hour how to build much bigger things. A stockade fence around a fort, a two-story house with a chimney, a whole frontier town with streets between the buildings. The logs snapped together at the notched corners with a solid, clean fit, and you learned the geometry of it by touch. Your little brother came in and knocked the whole thing over with one swipe of his hand, and you would wrestle him to the ground and then rebuild from scratch. The good of Lincoln logs was that they lasted forever and taught real construction. You could feel how a corner held. The hard was that a stray log under a bare foot at midnight felt like stepping on a broken bottle. And no matter how careful you were, a few logs always went missing under the couch. Lincoln logs are still sold today, though the newer versions use different wood and slightly different designs. Do you still remember the smell of that tin drum? And did the tiny wrenches at number 66 ever bite your fingers on Christmas afternoon? Number 66. Erector sets with tiny metal wrenches. The erector set on your Christmas morning was a heavy blue metal case full of steel girders, brass gears, tiny nuts and bolts, and a small screwdriver and wrench pair that were exactly the right size for a boy's hands. A.C. Gilbert of New Haven had invented it in 1913 after watching workmen assemble the steel frame of a New York building. And by the 50s, his company was making the finest construction toy in America. You laid the parts out on the dining room table on newspaper because your mother was serious about not scratching the wood. Then you followed the instruction booklet and built a working Ferris wheel with a hand crank that turned real gears and lifted little metal cars up and around, or a windmill whose blades spun, or a bridge that could hold a book. Some sets came with a small electric motor that ran off a battery and could power your creation. The finger blisters were part of it. Turning 100 tiny nuts down on tiny bolts left your fingertips sore for days. The good of the erector set was that it produced real engineers and real inventors. Half the men who put America on the moon had grown up with one. The hard was the cost. A big erector set was $15 or more, a serious chunk of a working man's paycheck. Gilbert died in 1961, and the company that bore his name folded a few years later. Do you still remember the crank on your Ferris wheel? And did the chemistry set at number 65 ever burn a hole in the kitchen table? Number 65. Chemistry sets that would horrify a modern parent. The Gilbert chemistry set for 1955 came in a folding metal case the size of a small suitcase, and inside were 70 glass vials of chemicals your parents would faint to see in your bedroom today. Potassium nitrate, ammonium nitrate, sodium ferrocyanide, powdered zinc, a small brass alcohol burner with a wick, a rack of test tubes, a porcelain crucible. The instruction manual was 112 pages long and walked you through experiments that produced real flames, real explosions, and small clouds of toxic gas. There was a whole chapter on how to grow rock candy crystals, and another on how to produce hydrogen sulfide, which smells like rotten eggs and can be dangerous in a closed room. Nobody in the 50s thought this was reckless. It was how you got boys interested in science, and it worked. The chemists and engineers and doctors who came of age in the 60s and 70s had all grown up burning holes in the linoleum with a chemistry set in the basement. The good of the chemistry set was that it made science real. You saw the reactions with your own eyes. You learned to measure precisely because if you did not, something bad happened. The hard was the actual danger. Kids did get hurt. In 1978, the Consumer Product Safety Commission finally cracked down on what could go into a home chemistry set. And by the 80s, they had been reduced to a few dozen harmless substances and some vinegar experiments. Do you still remember the smell of your basement lab? And did the pop and crack at number 64 bring the whole neighborhood running on the 4th of July? Number 64. Cap guns cracking like real gunfire on the 4th of July. The Fanner 50 on your holster was a nickel-plated toy revolver with a fake pearl grip, and it looked so much like a real Colt Peacemaker that it was a wonder every kid on the block was not shot by the police. You loaded it with a red paper roll of caps that fed through the top like a tiny film strip. Each pull of the trigger advanced the roll and struck one of the little dots of gunpowder against the metal firing pin, and the whole gun cracked like a small firecracker with a puff of blue smoke and a smell of burnt sulfur. On the 4th of July, every boy in the neighborhood came out at once, and the block sounded like a small war. The best cap guns were made by Nichols, Kilgore, Hubley, and Maddell, and they had die-cast metal frames that felt heavy and real in a small hand. Some fired paper caps, some fired disc caps, some had spinning cylinders that you loaded one cap at a time like a real gun. The good of the cap gun was the ritual of it. Boys learned to draw, to spin the gun on a finger, to twirl a holster on a hip. The hard was the burnt fingers from a cap that fired off the roll, and the deafening crack too close to your ear. By the 70s, rising concerns about toy guns and school shootings pushed cap guns to the margins. And by the 80s, most manufacturers had stopped making the realistic models altogether. Do you still smell that gunpowder? And did the coonskin cap at number 63 ever cover your ears in the schoolyard? Number 63. Davy Crockett Coonskin Caps. In December of 1954, Walt Disney aired the first episode of Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier, starring Fess Parker on his Sunday night TV show. And within 3 months, every boy in America wanted a coonskin cap on his head. Retailers ran out of raccoon fur that spring. Cap manufacturers switched to rabbit and dyed it to look like raccoon. Toy stores could not keep them on the shelves. Your father brought one home from Woolworths or from the Sears catalog, and you put it on your head at breakfast and did not take it off until bedtime for the next 6 months. The tail hung down the back of your neck and swung when you ran, and every boy in the schoolyard wore an identical one. So that recess looked like a small army of frontiersmen. The song from the show was on the radio every hour of the day. Born on a mountaintop in Tennessee, you knew every word. You had the plastic knife, and the plastic powder horn, and the fringed jacket to go with the cap, and you refought the Alamo in the vacant lot behind the drugstore twice a week. The good of the Davy Crockett craze was the pure shared childhood joy of it. Nothing since has ever unified American boys the same way in the same season. The hard was the itchy fur in the summer heat, and the tail that got yanked by every kid who thought it was funny. The craze burned bright and burned out inside a year. Do you still remember the words of the song? And did you puff on the sweet candy at number 62 behind the corner store? Number 62. Candy cigarettes puffed by kids playing grown-up. The little cardboard box was made to look exactly like a pack of Chesterfields or Lucky Strikes or Camels, printed with the same colors and logos. And inside were 20 white sugar sticks with a red dot painted on one end to look like a lit ember. You paid a nickel for the pack at the corner candy store, tapped one out into your palm, and put it between your lips while you leaned on the wall trying to look like Humphrey Bogart. Some brands were even packaged with a light dusting of powdered sugar inside so that when you blew through the stick, a small white puff came out that looked like smoke. Every kid in the neighborhood had a pack. Kids as young as 5 walked around with a candy cigarette dangling from their lip, and nobody thought anything of it. Real cigarette companies knew what they were doing. They had signed licensing deals with the candy manufacturers because they understood that a kid who spent a year pretending to smoke a Winston was much more likely to buy real Winstons when he turned 18. The good of the candy was the peppermint sweetness and the pleasure of the ritual, tapping the pack, offering one to a friend, looking cool. The hard, in hindsight, was that a whole generation was being trained to smoke before they could tie their own shoes. By the 90s, most states had banned candy cigarettes from stores. Do you remember the sugar dust puffing out? And did the sound of cap guns and war cries at number 61 echo down every street in the neighborhood on Saturday afternoon? Number 61. Cowboys and Indians running through the yard. Saturday afternoon in the summer of 1957, and every boy on the block was in the vacant lot behind the drugstore, half of them wearing coonskin caps and cap gun holsters as cowboys, half wearing paper feathers stuck in a headband as Indians, and everybody hollering at the top of his lungs. The game had rules that nobody could quite explain and boundaries that shifted every 15 minutes. Somebody was always shot. Somebody was always captured. Somebody was always being tied to the tree with a jump rope. Girls were sometimes drafted as horses. The whole thing was a reenactment of every Western movie and TV show and comic book of the decade, and the world it imagined was almost entirely made up. Real Native Americans in 1957 wore blue jeans and worked in factories, but no boy on the block knew or cared. The good of the game was the shared imagination and the fresh air and the hours of pure play. The hard, looking back, is what it taught. A whole generation of boys grew up thinking the West had been won cleanly, and the version of history they carried into adulthood needed a lot of unlearning. Cowboys and Indians as a play theme faded gradually from the 60s on, as Westerns lost their grip on American culture and as understanding grew about what those games meant. By the 80s, nobody was playing it in the yard anymore. Do you still remember whose side you always wanted to be on? And did the taped-up ball at number 60 go over the fence into old Mrs. Riley's yard more times than you can count? Number 60, sandlot baseball with a taped-up ball. The vacant lot behind the corner store was your ballpark, and the bases were a folded newspaper for first, a shirt for second, a hubcap for third, and the manhole cover for home. The bat was your father's old Louisville Slugger with a crack in the handle, taped up with electrical tape. And the ball had been a real baseball at some point in 1953, but had lost its cover to a hard grounder in the alley and had been rewrapped in a spiral of black friction tape until it was the size of a small grapefruit. Nobody had a glove. You caught barehanded and your palm was red for the whole month of July. Games started when enough kids showed up and ended when the streetlights came on, or when somebody hit the ball onto old Mrs. Riley's roof and could not get it back down. There were no umpires, there were no coaches, there were no parents. Every play was argued, and every argument was settled by the two oldest boys. You learned to hit, to throw, to catch, to slide into second on gravel, all without an adult saying a single word. The good of sandlot baseball was that it was the child's game the way it was meant to be, run by children, decided by children, played until it was too dark to see. The hard was the skinned knees, the ball you lost forever, the fights that occasionally settled with fists. Little league and organized sports slowly took over from the 60s on, and the sandlot went quiet. Do you still remember the crack of that taped bat? And did you still play kick the can at number 59 after the supper dishes were done? Number 59, kick the can after supper. The empty can sat in the middle of the street, right under the streetlight, and one kid, the one who had been picked as it, stood next to it with his eyes closed and counted to 100. Everyone else scattered into yards and behind trees and under porches to hide. When it opened his eyes, he had to find the hiders and race back to the can before they could sneak up and kick it, freeing anyone he had already caught. If he tagged you, you sat by the can and waited. If somebody kicked the can before he tagged everyone, all the prisoners were released and the game started again. The game could go for 2 hours in the summer twilight. Kick the Can was the great American after-supper game. Every neighborhood played some version of it, sometimes under a different name, sometimes with slightly different rules. It combined hide-and-seek with tag with a race, and it worked for kids from 6 to 16 at the same time. The little ones hid close to home and screamed when they were tagged. The big ones climbed the fence and hid in the neighbor's garage. Everyone played until called home. The good of Kick the Can was that it needed nothing but an old tomato can and a whole block of kids. It was free, it was outdoors, it went on and on. The hard was the moms who yelled at 10 o'clock and the mothers who complained about the noise. Kick the Can is still played in some pockets of America, but nothing like the summer nights of the 50s. Do you still remember the sound of that can clattering? And did you ever charge across the line at number 58 and break through the whole row of hands? Number 58, Red Rover, Red Rover. 2 lines of children faced each other across the lawn, about 20 feet apart, each kid gripping the wrists of the ones on either side of him to form a chain. The captain of the left side hollered across the grass, Red Rover, send Billy right over. And Billy from the right side let go of his neighbors, took a running start, and charged headfirst at the linked line of the left side, aiming for what he thought was the weakest handhold between 2 kids. If he broke through, he got to take one prisoner back to his side. If the line held and he bounced off, he had to stay on the left side and add his strength to their chain. The game went back and forth until one side was down to 2 or 3 kids, and the last charge shattered the whole line. Red Rover was played at birthday parties, in schoolyards at recess, on the front lawn on a Saturday afternoon. Nothing about it was safe. The strongest boys aimed for the smallest girls, because their arms were the easiest to break, and the smallest girls sometimes went home with a bruised chest or a wrenched shoulder. The good of Red Rover was the drama of it. The whole line braced together, the runner charged, the impact was everything. The hard was the actual injury count, which was significant. Most schools quietly banned Red Rover by the 70s for exactly that reason. Do you still remember the feel of gripping tight while somebody charged your section? And did you freeze in place at number 57 when they touched your arm? Number 57, freeze tag in the front yard. One kid was it, and everyone else ran in every direction across the front lawn. If it tagged you, you froze in place. Whatever position you were in, arms out, one leg up, mouth open. You had to hold that pose until another unfrozen kid ran past and touched you and thawed you out. The game only ended when it managed to freeze everybody at the same time, which was almost impossible on a big lawn with a lot of players. Half the fun was watching the frozen kids trying to keep their balance. Another half was the wild scramble to unfreeze a friend before it saw. There were 100 variations. TV freeze tag, where you had to shout the name of a TV show to be unfrozen. Bear freeze tag, where the frozen kid stood on all fours. Under the legs tag, where the thaw required crawling underneath the frozen kid's legs. Every neighborhood had its own rules, and children argued them for hours. Freeze tag was played by kids from 4 to 12, and everyone from the youngest to the oldest could join in. The good of the game was that it burned off boundless energy on a summer evening and required nothing but a big open space and no equipment at all. The hard was the falls when a frozen kid tried to hold a balance he could not hold, and the exhaustion of running full speed for 2 hours straight without stopping. Tag is still played by kids today, but not with the free-range abandon of the 50s. Do you still remember what pose you always got caught in? And did the game at number 56 ever end? Because nobody could find the last hider. Number 56. Hide and seek that stretch across the whole block. The oldest boy on the block called the game, and every kid within earshot came running. He leaned his forehead against the elm tree in front of your house, closed his eyes, and started counting to 100 out loud. Coming ready or not, everyone scattered. The rules were simple, but the territory was huge. The whole block was fair game. You could hide behind Old Man Whitaker's garbage cans. You could crawl into the crawl space under the porch. You could climb the elm tree if you were bold. You could squeeze into the space between the fence and the hedge. The best hiders knew every hidden corner within a 2-block radius. The bad hiders always picked the same spot behind the same bush and got caught first every time. The game could go on for an hour. Kids would settle into their hiding spots and sometimes fall asleep, and it would take a search party of the other kids to find them at dark. Sometimes the person who was it just gave up and yelled, "Ollie, Ollie, oxen free," and everybody came out from wherever they had been. The good of hide and seek was the silence, the small held breath of hiding perfectly, the small joy of not being found. The hard was the kid who hid so well he was still hiding when his mother called him for supper an hour later. Hide and seek is still played today, but the range of it, the block-wide expedition, is gone with the days when parents were fine with kids being out of sight. Do you still remember your best hiding place? And did the cards close? Pinned to your bike spokes at number 55 sound like a real motorcycle rolling down the sidewalk. Number 55. Playing cards clothes pinned to bike spokes. Your bike was a Schwinn or a Columbia, or a Roadmaster with fat balloon tires and coaster brakes and no gears, and it weighed as much as a small refrigerator. To make it sound like a real motorcycle, you dug a couple of playing cards out of your mother's junk drawer, clipped a wooden clothespin over each one, and clamped them to the front fork so that the loose edge of the card stuck into the spinning spokes. Then you pushed off and pedaled hard, and the cards fluttered against the spokes with a loud, rapid-fire BRAM that echoed off every garage on the block. The faster you rode, the deeper the growl. Down a long hill, your bike sounded exactly like a Harley-Davidson to a 9-year-old's ears. Everyone had a favorite deck to sacrifice. You needed a stiff card because the flexible ones tore apart after a couple of blocks. The bicycle brand actually worked best, and every kid learned that even though nobody could explain the joke. If you had 2 cards on each fork, you sounded twice as loud. And if you had one on the back wheel, too, you sounded like a whole biker gang. The good of the card in the spokes was that it turned a plain bicycle into an event. Every ride was announced. The hard was the destruction of good playing cards, which meant nobody could ever find a full deck in the house. And the flat tire from a card that got sucked into the tube once every 100 miles. Do you still remember the sound? And did you carry a skate key at number 54 in your pocket all summer long? Number 54. Roller skates that clamped to your shoes with a key. Your roller skates were metal contraptions with 4 steel wheels that clamped onto the outside of your regular shoes with a pair of adjustable jaws. You tightened the jaws by turning a small key that hung on a leather cord around your neck. That skate key was so central to a 50s childhood that Melanie later wrote a hit song about it, and every listener over 40 knew exactly what she meant. You sat on the front porch step, jammed a shoe into each skate, cranked the key hard to lock the jaws onto your soles, then wobbled up and rolled off down the sidewalk. Every crack in the concrete was an event. Every slope was an adventure. The skates would come loose after 20 minutes, and you had to stop and re-tighten. The wheels were solid steel, so on a smooth new sidewalk they were fast, and on a rough old one they were painful, sending every pebble straight up through your knees. Roller skating was a whole subculture. Kids skated all summer, all afternoon, all block. There were roller skating rinks in every mid-sized town, where you rented a wooden pair of shoe skates and skated in circles to organ music. The good of the clamp-on skate was the freedom, the whoosh of rolling downhill, the wind on your face. The hard was the falls, and the wheels that seized up when a pebble got jammed. Skateboards and shoe skates replaced them in the 60s, and the key on a string went out with them. Do you still have your skate key somewhere in a box? And did you pull your little sister down the sidewalk in the little red wagon at number 53? Number 53. Red Radio Flyer wagons hauling every treasure. The Radio Flyer wagon in your garage was a rectangle of red painted steel about 3 feet long with a wooden bench seat and 4 wheels and a long steel handle that folded down when you were done. It had been made in Chicago since 1917 by a company started by an Italian immigrant named Antonio Passan, and by the 50s, nearly every American backyard had one. You loaded it with everything a child could think of: your baseball bat and glove, your comic books, your dog, your little sister, a pile of grass clippings, a load of bricks you were pretending was a delivery, a wounded soldier you were pulling to the medic. Every play scenario involved the wagon. On winter nights when it snowed hard, your father tied a rope to the handle and pulled you down the sidewalk while you sat in the wagon bundled in a blanket. On summer afternoons, you rolled it down the driveway in a controlled crash and sometimes lost teeth. The good of the Radio Flyer was that it was built like a tank and lasted a whole childhood, and often a whole neighborhood of childhoods, passed from one family to the next. The hard was the pinched fingers when the handle folded down wrong, and the tipping over on a steep hill. Radio Flyer is still made today, and looks almost identical to the 50s version. Do you still remember the sound of those steel wheels on concrete? And did the fort at number 52 ever stand up longer than a rainstorm? Number 52. Cardboard box forts in the living room. Your mother came home from Sears with a new refrigerator, and the deliveryman left the giant cardboard box on the front lawn. And for the next 3 weeks, that box was the center of your entire existence. Your father helped you cut a door in one side with his utility knife and windows in the others, and you dragged it into the living room and set up housekeeping. Inside, you spread a blanket for a rug, brought in your teddy bear and your Lincoln Logs and a flashlight, and lived a whole secret life 2 feet away from your mother's ironing board. Sometimes the box was a spaceship, and sometimes a submarine, and sometimes a log cabin on the frontier, and sometimes a fort under siege from your little brother. 2 boxes tied together made a whole complex. 3 boxes with tunnels cut between them were a mansion. The living room floor was littered with cardboard shavings for a week. The good of the box fort was that it cost nothing, and it fed the imagination endlessly. Every child understands the magic of a small hidden space, with a low ceiling that is just his. The hard was your mother's patience, which ran out after about 2 weeks, and the eventual trip to the trash for the collapsing wet box after the leak in the roof. Every kid built one. Every kid remembers his. Do you still remember the smell of the cardboard? And did the sugar water in a pitcher at number 51 bring the whole block to your front curb? Number 51. Kool-Aid stands at the end of the driveway. You were 8 years old on a Saturday morning in July, and you got the idea over breakfast. You would sell Kool-Aid. Your mother helped you mix a pitcher of grape or cherry from the little paper packet with the pitcher man smiling on the front, and you carted it out to the sidewalk with a card table and a stack of paper cups and a hand-lettered sign that read Kool-Aid 5 cents. You sat on a folding chair in the sun for 4 hours. The mailman bought a cup. Your grandmother bought a cup. The Fuller brush man bought a cup. Old Mr. Peterson from across the street bought 2. By supper you had made 40 cents, and you were the richest kid on the block. The Kool-Aid brand had started in 1927 in Nebraska, and by the 50s had reached every kitchen in America. A packet cost a nickel. Add a cup of sugar and a pitcher of water and you had 2 quarts. There was no adult overseeing the operation. There were no permits. There was no discussion of food safety. Kids ran the stands themselves, and neighbors bought out of pure kindness. The good of the Kool-Aid stand was the lesson in it. You made something, you sold something, you counted your money. The hard was the summer heat, the flies in the pitcher, and the neighborhood dog that lifted his leg on the table one afternoon. Kool-Aid stands still happen, but not on the sun-drenched, all day, whole neighborhood scale of the 50s. Do you still remember what you did with your first 40 cents? And did the cardboard cards at number 50 stiffen the bubble gum in your back pocket all summer? Number 50. Bubble gum with a stiff cardboard baseball card inside. The Topps Company in Brooklyn started putting baseball cards in packs of bubble gum in 1951, and by 1952, the modern trading card was born. You went to the corner store with a nickel in your fist and asked for a pack of Topps. The clerk handed you a small waxed paper wrapper with a stick of pink chewing gum and 5 glossy cardboard cards sealed inside. You paid your nickel and stood right there on the sidewalk and tore it open. The gum was hard and dusty from the wax paper and smelled like sugar and mothballs, and it broke into 3 pieces the first time you chewed it. But the cards were the real treasure. You flipped through them fast, hoping for a mantle or a maze or a Snyder. If you got a mantle, you were rich for the day. If you got somebody you already had, you carried it to school for trading. Trades were serious business. 2 cards for 1, 3 commons for a star, a whole team for 1 holy grail. Kids collected in shoeboxes under the bed. Mothers all over America threw those shoeboxes out in the 60s when the kids left for college. Anyone who kept his collection had a small fortune by 1985. The 1952 Topps Mickey Mantle sells today for millions. The good of the cards was the joy of the pack, the trading, the memorization of stats on the back. The hard was the terrible gum, and the mother who cleaned your room while you were at scout camp. Do you still remember the star you never got? And did the corner store at number 49 have a glass counter full of penny wonders? Number 49. Penny candy at the corner store. The store was called Petron's or Kaminsky's or Kim's or just the store, and it stood on the corner 2 blocks from your house. You walked in with a nickel in your pocket and the whole day ahead of you. And old Mr. Petron leaned on the wooden counter and watched patient while you made the hardest decision of your morning. The candy was in glass jars and shallow cardboard trays lined up in front of you at your eye level. Mary Jane's at a penny apiece, the peanut butter caramel in yellow wax paper, root beer barrels, Bitto honeys, squirrel nut zippers, Tootsie Rolls, bazooka bubble gum with the tiny comic strip inside, fireballs the size of a marble that turned your mouth red, wax lips and wax mustaches you chewed on until the wax got soft, Necco wafers in a paper roll, sugar dots on white paper strips, long licorice whips. You pointed and asked for 2 Mary Janes, 3 fireballs and a bazooka, and Mr. Petron counted them into a small brown paper bag with hands that shook slightly. The The whole transaction took 10 minutes because you kept changing your mind. The good of penny candy was that a child could stand at that counter and be a customer, a real customer with money, making real choices. The hard was the sugar, and the fact that a nickel had to last the week. Corner candy stores began disappearing in the 60s as supermarkets and 7-Elevens took over. Do you still remember your favorite penny piece? And did the soda fountain at number 48 polish glass mugs down to the shine? Number 48. Soda fountains at the drugstore counter. Every drugstore in America in the 50s had a soda fountain along one wall, a long marble counter with round chrome stools bolted to the floor, and behind the counter, a soda jerk in a white paper cap and a starched apron working the syrup taps and the fizzy water spigot. You sat on a stool with your feet dangling, and the soda jerk asked what you wanted. A vanilla Coke, a cherry Coke, a lime Ricky, a chocolate egg cream, a phosphate, a green river, a brown cow. He pumped one squirt of syrup from a tall pump into the bottom of a tall glass, filled it with soda water from the spigot, stirred with a long-handled spoon, added a straw and slid it across the marble to you, all for 10 cents. If you were feeling rich, you got a hot fudge sundae with 3 scoops in a boat-shaped dish, or a banana split with 3 flavors and 3 sauces, and whipped cream and a maraschino cherry on top. The soda fountain was a social hub. Teenagers courted there after school. Neighbors met for coffee. Mothers took their kids after the doctor's appointment. The good of the soda fountain was the ritual and the craftsmanship. Every drink was mixed to order in front of you. The hard was that after the Second World War, the cost of running a fountain rose and bottled sodas became cheap and easy. And one by one, the drugstores tore out their marble counters through the 60s. Do you still remember your soda jerk by name? And did the malt shop at number 47 sing to you from the jukebox in the corner? Number 47. Malt shops with high stools and jukeboxes. The malt shop was where the high school kids went after football practice. And if you were still in grade school, you begged your big sister to take you along on Saturday afternoon. It was a smaller, more casual place than the drugstore fountain, often just a lunch counter with booths along the wall. And the specialty was the malted milkshake made with a scoop of Horlicks malt powder that gave it that toasty caramel flavor. The soda jerk mixed the ice cream and milk and syrup and malt in a heavy metal cup on a green Hamilton Beach spindle mixer, and the whole thing whirred and rattled while he cleaned the glasses in front of you. Then he poured the shake into a tall soda glass with a little left in the metal cup as a bonus. 2 straws so you could share with your date. In the corner was a jukebox with the top hits of the day. Rock Around the Clock, Blueberry Hill all shook up, That'll Be the Day. You dropped a nickel and picked 3 songs and they played while you drank. The booths had red vinyl seats and Formica tabletops flecked with silver. The good of the malt shop was that it was a teen space, a place where kids could sit for 2 hours without spending much money and be treated like adults. The hard was that a chocolate malt cost 35 cents, and that was a lot of babysitting money to save up. Malt shops faded through the 60s as fast food chains rose. Do you still remember your favorite song on the jukebox? And did the fizz at number 46 bubble up on your nose when the soda jerk squirted the syrup in? Number 46. Cherry Coke's fizz to order. The soda jerk drew a tall glass down from the shelf, pumped 1 squirt of Coca-Cola syrup into the bottom, added a small pump of cherry syrup, filled the glass with soda water from the tap, stirred with a long spoon, and slid it across the marble. 10 cents. That was a cherry Coke. And every kid in America in the 50s considered it the finest drink ever invented. The Coke syrup was dark and heavy, and full of the caramel and vanilla notes of the original formula. The cherry syrup was bright pink and sweet. The soda water was ice cold and fizzed like it was alive. When they mixed together in the glass, the whole thing went a rich mahogany color with a foam of pink bubbles on top. You took the first sip through the paper straw and the cherry hit first, then the Coke, then the fizz. Nothing bottled has ever tasted quite the same because the fresh syrup and the fresh carbonation together made a drink that was more than the sum of its parts. Some fountains had lime Coke, some had lemon, some had vanilla Coke, which was the everyday classic. But cherry Coke was the queen of them all. The good was the pure joy of the drink itself, and the small pleasure of watching it made in front of you. The hard was that premixed cherry Coke in a can, which Coca-Cola finally launched in 1985, did not taste as good, and by then the fountain version had almost disappeared. Do you still remember the first sip? And did the tall, frosty mug at number 45 hold as much root beer as your stomach could handle? Number 45. Root beer floats in tall, frosty mugs. At the A&W Drive-In on the edge of town, they served the root beer in a tall glass mug that had been kept in the freezer, and when it came to your car window on a metal tray, the mug was so cold, the outside was frosted white with ice crystals. 2 scoops of vanilla ice cream sat on top, and the root beer bubbled up around them in a foamy brown fountain that ran down the side of the mug and puddled on the tray. This was a root beer float, and every kid in America knew that no drink was better on an August night. The vanilla ice cream started to melt into the root beer and turned the whole thing into a creamy, soft, floaty mess that you drank with a straw and ate with a long-handled spoon at the same time. Frank Allen and Roy Allen had started A&W in 1919 with a single root beer stand in California, and by the 50s, there were nearly 2,000 locations with car hops on roller skates and speaker boxes at every parking spot. The good of the root beer float was the drama of the presentation and the pure sensory joy of the combination. The hard was the ice cream that would not go up the straw, and the melted mess at the bottom of the mug when you were done. A&W is still around today, but the frosty mugs are rare, and the car hops are gone. Do you still remember the first foam on the top of the mug? And did the egg cream at number 44 make sense to you, even though it had no egg and no cream? Number 44. Egg creams in a Brooklyn candy store. The egg cream is a New York City drink, and if you did not grow up in a Brooklyn or a Bronx or a Manhattan neighborhood, you may never have had a real one. It was invented in the Lower East Side sometime in the late 19th century and named to sound fancy, even though it contained no egg and no cream. The recipe was cold whole milk poured into a tall glass to about an inch, then a squirt of seltzer from a real seltzer bottle with the little chrome trigger, added gentle to make a white foam on top, then a long slow pour of Fox's You Bet chocolate syrup down the middle, and a fast stir with a long spoon to blend it all into a rich chocolate foam that reached the top of the glass. Fox's You Bet was made in Brooklyn, and no other syrup made a real egg cream. Every candy store had a marble counter and a real seltzer siphon, and every kid in the neighborhood knew the exact place that made the best egg cream. There were arguments: Isaac Fox on Ocean Avenue, Weinstein's on Kings Highway. Every family had its favorite. 10 cents. The good of the egg cream was the theater of making it, and the pure Brooklyn ritual of standing at the counter and drinking it in 3 long pulls. The hard was that outside New York nobody knew what an egg cream was, and even in New York, the corner candy store began disappearing by the 70s. Do you still remember your neighborhood spot? And did the milkshake at number 43 come thick enough to bend the straw? Number 43. Milkshakes hand-mixed on a green Hamilton Beach. The milkshake spindle at the counter was a green Hamilton Beach with 3 shafts and 3 metal cups, and the soda jerk lined them up when a big order came in and started them all at once. Into each metal cup went 3 scoops of hard ice cream, a splash of whole milk, a squirt of syrup, and sometimes a spoon of malt. He lifted the cup up to the spindle, hit the switch, and the whole counter rattled with the whirring of the beaters. 90 seconds later, he pulled the cup down, poured the shake into a tall soda glass, and left the rest in the metal cup on the counter next to the glass. That leftover was the best part, a whole extra half shake included in the price, and you scraped it out with a long spoon while you drank the glass through a paper straw. A good milkshake was so thick the straw stood up on its own. A great milkshake bent the straw. The Hamilton Beach spindle had been invented in 1911, and by the 50s, there was one on the counter of every diner and drugstore in America: chocolate, strawberry, vanilla, banana, and if the fountain had it, black raspberry. The good was the thickness, the malt flavor, the leftover in the metal cup. The hard was the brain freeze if you drank too fast, and the sore jaw from sucking on a straw against ice cream that would not budge. Blenders replaced spindles in the 60s in many places, and the classic shake experience faded. Do you still remember the sound of that spindle? And did you spend a nickel at number 42 on a whole afternoon of adventure? Number 42. Nickel comic books off the drugstore rack. The wire rack stood at the front of the drugstore near the door, and you spun it slowly to see every comic on all four sides. Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Captain America, Uncle Scrooge, Little Lulu, Archie, Little Dot, Casper the Friendly Ghost, Sad Sack, Sergeant Rock. Every kid had his favorites, and his mother had a limit. One comic per drugstore trip, and the choice took 20 minutes. Comics cost a dime for most of the 50s, but a lot of the older reprints and the smaller titles could still be found for a nickel through the middle of the decade. The paper was thin, and the colors were bright, and the ink came off on your fingers if you read the same book too many times. You took it home and read it on the front porch, then read it again lying on your bed after supper, then again the next morning, then traded it with the kid next door for one of his. The good of comic books was the escape into a world of superheroes and animals, and small-town Archie hijinks, and the small library that grew under your bed by the year. The hard was the Comics Code Authority that arrived in 1954 after the Senate hearings on juvenile delinquency and stripped a lot of the wildest and best comics out of the racks. Comic book prices climbed from a dime to 12 cents in the early 60s, then to 15, then to 20, and eventually to the specialty shop model of today. Do you still remember the comic you read 100 times? And did the whole family spread out on the parlor floor to read the Sunday paper at number 41? Number 41. Sunday funny papers spread across the floor. The Sunday paper came thicker than any other day of the week, and the funny section was always in the middle wrapped in its own bright color band. You spread it out on the parlor rug on your stomach and read Blondie, Dick Tracy, Prince Valiant, Peanuts, Beetle Bailey, Nancy, Little Orphan Annie, Rex Morgan, and Gasoline Alley, in a specific order that you had worked out the first Sunday you could read. Some of them ran a whole page. Some of them ran a strip across 2 columns. All of them were in color. Sunday funnies were a cultural event. Everyone read them. The whole nation shared a set of characters. When Blondie made a joke at the breakfast table on Sunday, 20 million families laughed at the same time. Peanuts had launched in 1950, and by mid-decade every child knew Charlie Brown and Snoopy. Prince Valiant told a serialized story that ran for decades and required you to remember what had happened last week. Dick Tracy had two-way wrist radios in 1946 that seemed like pure science fiction. The good of the funny pages was the shared culture, the routine of a Sunday morning, the parents lying on the couch, while the kids sprawled on the floor and read out loud. The hard was the newsprint that stained your hands, and the sibling fight over who got to read Peanuts first. The Sunday funnies still exist in shrinking newspapers today, but the ritual of the whole family gathering around them is largely gone. Do you still remember your favorite strip? And did the little truck at number 40 jingle its way down your street on the hottest day of summer? Number 40, the ice cream truck's tinny jingle. You heard it 3 blocks away. A small tinkling melody carried on the summer air, and every kid on the porch stopped what he was doing and cocked his head like a dog listening for the doorbell. The ice cream truck was coming. It was a white panel van with a big painted sign on the side, and a speaker on the roof playing a scratchy recording of Turkey in the Straw or Pop, Goes the Weasel or the Entertainer. You tore into the house and begged your mother for a dime, and she reached into her purse and gave you what she could, and you ran back out and stood at the curb, with a whole line of neighborhood kids already waiting. The truck rolled up slow and stopped, and the driver leaned out through the side window with a small chest of dry ice at his hip. You looked over the menu painted on the side. Fudgsicle, Creamsicle, Push-Up, Strawberry Shortcake Bar, Nutty Buddy, Bomb Pop, Chocolate Eclair, Ice Cream Sandwich. The choices were agonizing, and you had 10 cents. You picked the Fudgsicle because it lasted longest. The good of the ice cream truck was the pure event of it, a small daily concert with a prize at the end. The hard was the mothers who said no dime today, and the kid whose Fudgsicle broke off the stick on the first bite. Ice cream trucks still roam some neighborhoods today, but nothing on the scale of a 50s block-by-block route, with 3 trucks a week. Do you still remember your favorite bar? And did the white truck at number 39 Bring a good humor man in a spotless uniform to your driveway. Number 39. Good humor bars from the white truck. The good humor truck was a step above the ordinary ice cream truck. It was gleaming white and refrigerated with a big freezer chest in the back. And the driver wore a starched white uniform with a black bow tie and a matching cap and a coin changer clipped to his belt. He rang a small string of bells with a pull of a rope, not a recorded jingle but real brass bells, and every kid on the block came running. His specialty was the good humor bar, a rectangle of vanilla ice cream on a wooden stick, covered in a hard chocolate shell that cracked when you bit into it. 10 cents. He had strawberry shortcake, toasted almond, coconut, chocolate malt, and half a dozen other flavors all wrapped in paper with the Good Humor logo. He knew every kid on his route by name. He worked the same street every day at almost the same time all summer long. Good Humor had been founded in Ohio in 1920, and the ice cream truck version launched in 1928. And by the 50s, they had thousands of trucks in every American city. The good of the Good Humor man was the whole experience. The gleaming truck, the smart uniform, the treat, the personal service. The hard was that the price was a dime, when the plain ice cream truck was a nickel, and not every family could afford a Good Humor every week. Good Humor sold its truck routes in the 70s and switched to grocery store distribution, and the white truck disappeared. Do you still remember your Good Humor man's name? And did the popsicle at number 38 ever split down the middle, just right for you and your best friend? Number 38. Popsicles that split down the middle to share. The twin popsicle was invented by a boy named Frank Epperson in 1905 when he left a stirring stick in a glass of soda pop on his porch overnight in California, and it froze. And by the 50s, it had become an institution. The classic popsicle was two thin bars of flavored ice frozen together on two flat wooden sticks with a shallow groove running down the middle. You bought it for a nickel from the ice cream truck, and when your best friend showed up on his bike, you held the popsicle by both sticks and pulled slow, and even until it snapped clean in half down the groove. You handed one bar to him and kept one for yourself, and the two of you sat on the curb and ate them side by side. Grape, cherry, orange, root beer, lime, every flavor came in the twin style. The wooden stick had a joke printed on it in tiny letters that you could read once the ice was gone. Popsicles are what teachers use to grade papers. Get it? The good of the twin popsicle was the sharing built right into the design. The whole thing was a small ritual of friendship. The hard was the popsicle that broke wrong down the middle and gave one of you a lopsided share, and the sticky dyed hands when it started to melt in the sun. Twin popsicles are much rarer now. Most popsicles sold today come in single-stick versions. Do you still remember your best popsicle sharing partner? And did the test pattern at number 37 stare back at you from the TV screen after midnight? Number 37. TV test patterns and the national anthem sign-off. Television stations did not broadcast 24 hours a day in the 50s. Programming ended sometime after midnight, and the last thing on the air was a short film of the American flag waving in the wind, with the national anthem playing over the top. Then the announcer said good night, and the screen went to the test pattern. That test pattern was a black and white circular design with the head of an Indian in a headdress in the center, surrounded by rings and grids, and numbers used by TV engineers to calibrate the picture. That was the Indian head test pattern, and every American who watched TV in the 50s recognized it instantly. It stayed on the screen all night long along with a high-pitched tone, waiting for programming to resume in the morning. If you stayed up too late as a kid and the TV was still on, that was what you saw. Just a static Indian head staring back at you from the screen at 3 in the morning. Sometimes a snowstorm of static took over between programs, and you had to bang the top of the set to get the picture back. The good of the sign-off was the routine of it, the small nightly ceremony that closed the day for the whole country. The hard was that if you missed the last show, you had until morning to wait. TV stations moved to 24-hour broadcasting through the 70s and 80s, and the sign-off and test pattern disappeared. Do you still remember that Indian head? And did the rabbit ears at number 36 ever pick up a channel you were not supposed to watch? Number 36. rabbit ears wrapped in tinfoil for better reception. The TV in your living room was a big wooden cabinet with a small round screen in the middle, and on top of it were two thin telescoping metal antennae that stuck up at angles from a black plastic base. Those were the rabbit ears, and getting a clear picture out of them was an art form the whole family practiced together. You extended the left ear all the way up and pointed it slightly to the north. You extended the right ear halfway and pointed it to the northwest. You draped a strip of aluminum foil around one of them to boost the signal. You stood in a specific spot in the room holding your arms out because your body somehow helped. Then the picture came in clear for 2 minutes and someone moved and it went static again. In a fringe reception area where the TV station was far away, whole families rearranged furniture based on where the antenna needed to be. Some houses had an outdoor antenna on the roof that a father climbed up to adjust once a month. Ghosting was constant, that double image where a signal bounced off a building and arrived at the antenna twice. In color, the ghosting was worse. The good of rabbit ears was the sheer engineering charm of the situation and the family teamwork required to watch anything. The hard was the static and the constant fiddling, and the show you missed because the picture died just before the punchline. Cable TV took over in most homes by the 80s and rabbit ears disappeared. Do you still remember your family's TV spot? And did the whole family gather at number 35 in front of that one screen every night after supper? Number 35. The whole family gathered around one black and white TV. There was one television in the house, and it lived in the living room. And every night after supper, the whole family gathered in front of it. Your father sat in his easy chair with the newspaper on his lap. Your mother sat on the couch with her sewing basket. You and your brothers and sisters sat on the floor at close range in front of the screen because the picture was small and the room was dim. Nobody had headphones. Nobody had a separate room. Nobody had a phone in his hand. Everyone watched the same show at the same time, and the whole country watched with you. On Sunday, it was Ed Sullivan. On Monday, it was I Love Lucy. On Tuesday, it was the Milton Berle Show, or later Milton Berle's Texaco Star Theater. Every night had its ritual, and the whole family knew the schedule. When something big happened on television, everyone in America saw it at the same instant because there was only one TV per household and only 3 networks. The good of that shared TV was the family time it enforced. You sat together for 2 hours every night whether you liked it or not, and you talked during the commercials. The hard was that if your father wanted to watch the news, you did not get to watch cartoons, and there was no argument. Multiple TVs began showing up in American homes through the 60s, and the family living room television faded as a shared ritual. Do you still remember your father's chair? And did you shout cowabunga at the screen when the puppet at number 34 came out from behind the curtain? Number 34, Howdy Doody Time. At 5 o'clock every weekday afternoon, a man named Buffalo Bob Smith walked out onto a set that looked like a small circus, and behind him danced a marionette with red hair, a big grin, 48 freckles for the 48 states, and a name every child in America knew, Howdy Doody. The Peanut Gallery, a bleacher full of live children in the studio, roared. Buffalo Bob shouted the opening line, "Say kids, what time is it?" And every kid on the floor of every living room shouted back at the television, "It's Howdy Doody time." The show ran from 1947 to 1960 on NBC, and it was the first children's program to be a national daily event. Howdy Doody the puppet, Clarabelle the mute clown who honked a horn and squirted seltzer, Chief Thunderthud who invented the word cowabunga, the villain Phineas T. Bluster, and Princess Summerfall Winterspring. Every kid knew the whole cast by heart. The whole show was 30 minutes of songs and skits and stories aimed straight at children under 10. The good of Howdy Doody was that it was the first television that spoke directly to kids as an audience, and it defined children's TV for a generation. The hard was that it went off the air in 1960 with a famous last episode where Clarabelle finally spoke, and the whole generation that had grown up with it wept. Howdy Doody, the puppet lives now in a museum. Do you still remember the freckles on his cheeks? And did the roll call at number 33 ever include your name spelled out by Jimmy or Cheryl? Number 33. The Mickey Mouse Club Roll Call. Every weekday afternoon at 5 o'clock, the Mickey Mouse Club came on ABC, and the intro sequence rolled with a cartoon Mickey and Minnie leading a marching band, and the whole cast of Mouseketeers singing the theme song. M-I-C-C see you real soon. K-E-Y-Y because we like you. M-O-U-S-E. Then the Mouseketeer roll call opened the show. Cubby, Corinne, Cheryl, Jimmy, Bobby, Doreen, Sharon, Sherry, Darling, and the girl every boy in America was in love with, Annette Funicolo. They all wore matching mouse ear hats with their first names embroidered across the front. The show mixed live action skits, cartoons from the Disney Vault, filmed adventure serials like Spin and Marty and the Hardy Boys, and the daily musical numbers by the Mouseketeers. Every day had a theme: Fun with Music Day, Guest Star Day, Anything Can Happen Day, Circus Day, Talent Roundup Day. Kids across America put on paper mouse ears at home and sang along. Annette became a teen star and later a beach movie queen. Cubby became a lounge musician. The Mickey Mouse Club ran from 1955 to 1959 and defined afternoon television for the whole first generation of TV kids. The good of the club was that it made you feel like a member of something. The hard was the end of the show in 1959, when a whole generation had to say goodbye. Do you still remember singing along with the theme song? And did the collie at number 32 ever come running when Timmy fell in the well? Number 32. Lassie Coming Home Every Sunday Night. Sunday nights at 7 o'clock CBS aired 30 minutes of a beautiful rough-coated collie named Lassie doing the most heroic things a dog has ever done on television. She lived on a farm in California with a boy named Jeff and his mother and his grandfather in the early seasons, then moved to a farm with a boy named Timmy and his adoptive parents in the later ones, and she rescued somebody every single week. Timmy fell in the well again. Timmy got trapped under the tractor. Timmy wandered off in the blizzard. Lassie always found him, ran home for help, tugged on the grown-up sleeves until they followed her back, and saved his life before the credits rolled. The dog was actually a male collie named Pal in the original film, and every Lassie who followed was a direct descendant of Pal because his bloodline was written into the contract. There were 9 Lasses during the show's 20-year run from 1954 to 1973. The good of Lassie was the simple emotional pull of it. A child, a dog, a rescue, a happy ending every Sunday night. Every kid begged for a collie afterward, and the American Kennel Club registered a huge spike in collie ownership through the 50s. The hard was that the show was formulaic, and Timmy did fall in a lot of wells. Reruns and remakes have kept Lassie alive in some form ever since, but the Sunday night television ritual is long gone. Do you still remember the theme music? And did the masked man at number 31 ride off before you ever got to see his face? Number 31. The Lone Ranger in Tonto. Hi-yo Silver, away. Those 3 words from the announcer opened every episode, and the William Tell overture galloped underneath as a masked man on a white horse thundered across the western landscape. That was the Lone Ranger, played by Clayton Moore, and his faithful Indian companion Tonto, played by Jay Silverheels. And together, they rode across the American frontier righting wrongs and never taking off the mask. The Lone Ranger had started as a radio show in 1933 and moved to television in 1949. And by the 50s, every child in America knew the whole mythology. The Ranger had been a Texas Ranger left for dead after an ambush and nursed back to health by Tonto, who called him Kemisabe, which meant faithful friend. He wore a black mask made from his dead brother's vest so he could work in secret. He used silver bullets to remind himself that human life was precious. He never shot to kill, only to disarm. At the end of every episode, he rode off and someone always asked, "Who was that masked man?" And someone else always answered, "That was the Lone Ranger." The good of the show was the pure moral clarity, the shared code of honor between 2 friends of different races, at a time when American society had almost none of either. The hard, in hindsight, was Tonto's broken English and the shallow depiction of native life. The Lone Ranger went off the air in 1957 and the character has been remade a dozen times since, none as beloved as the original. Do you still remember the William Tell overture? And did the Palomino at number 30 rear up on his hind legs at the end of every episode? Number 30, Roy Rogers and Trigger. Roy Rogers was the king of the cowboys, and his Palomino Trigger was the smartest horse in the movies. And together, they ran on TV every Saturday morning from 1951 to 1957 on NBC. Roy sang, Roy shot, Roy caught the bad guys. Trigger reared up on his hind legs and pawed the air at the end of every episode. His wife Dale Evans rode beside him on her golden buckskin buttermilk, and the whole cast rounded out with Pat Brady in his Jeep Nellie Bell and their dog Bullet. The theme song, Happy Trails to You, played over the closing credits every week, sung by Roy and Dale together. Every kid in America knew the words. Roy Rogers merchandise was everywhere. The lunch box, the cap guns, the cowboy outfit with the fringed shirt and the felt hat, the board game, the bicycle, the bedspread, the record player. Sears alone sold over $100 million in Roy Rogers gear during his peak years. Roy himself was a kind and decent man who visited children's hospitals and never let his image get tarnished. And he was one of the few genuine Western movie stars who successfully made the jump to television. The good of the Roy Rogers show was that it gave American children a hero who was gentle and moral, and always did the right thing, and it did it every Saturday morning without fail. The hard was the sad day in 1965, when Trigger died and Roy had the horse stuffed and mounted in his museum, which some people found beautiful and some found strange. Do you still sing Happy Trails? And did you look up at the sky at number 29 when Sky King's Songbird flew overhead? Number 29, Sky King in the Wild Blue Yonder. Out of the clear blue of the western sky comes Sky King. That was the opening narration, and every kid in America knew it by heart. Sky King was a modern-day rancher and pilot who owned the Flying Crown Ranch in Arizona, and he flew a twin-engine Cessna he named Songbird. Each week he chased outlaws, rescued lost hikers, tracked down smugglers, and generally used his airplane and his brain to solve problems that would have taken a horse-borne posse a week to handle. His niece Penny lived with him on the ranch and often rode along, and his nephew Clipper too in the earlier seasons. The show ran from 1951 to 1962 and moved from mutual radio to television and stayed there through the 50s. It was a Saturday morning staple, and it did something no other Western did. It updated the whole cowboy myth for the age of the airplane. Sky King had the cowboy code and the frontier setting, but he flew instead of rode. And every boy in America who was learning about airplanes and jets and the space program had a hero who lived at the intersection of both worlds. The good of the show was the wonder of flight, the beautiful aerial shots of the Songbird flying over the Arizona desert, and the modern cowboy premise. The hard was that the show was cheaply made and the plots were repetitive, and Penny was written as the girl who always needed saving. Sky King went off the air in 1962, and reruns ran on Saturday mornings for another decade. Do you still remember the opening narration? And did the man in the baggy pants at number 28 make you giggle every weekday morning? Number 28, Captain Kangaroo on weekday mornings. Weekday mornings at 8 o'clock CBS opened the day for millions of preschoolers with a live show, starring a big, gentle man with a bowl haircut and a jacket with oversized pockets. That was Captain Kangaroo, played by Bob Keeshan, and he lived in the treasure house with a puppet dog named Bunny Rabbit, a puppet moose named Mr. Moose, a farmer named Mr. Green Jeans, and a Sherlock Holmes-obsessed clock named Grandfather Clock. Every morning, the captain came in through his door with his big pocketed jacket and greeted the children at home. And then he read stories, showed cartoons like Tom Terrific, welcomed guests, and made small quiet magic happen for 30 gentle minutes. The show ran from 1955 to 1984, one of the longest runs in the history of children's television. Bob Keeshan understood young children better than anyone else on television. His pace was slow. His voice was gentle. He never talked down to kids. He never yelled. He never sold sugary cereal too aggressively. Mr. Moose's running gag was to trick the captain into saying a code word, so that ping-pong balls would rain down on his head from above, and every child in America laughed on cue. The good of Captain Kangaroo was that it was a safe, warm place for a child's morning, a slow-paced show in an era of increasingly frantic television. The hard was that it went off the air in 1984, and nothing quite like it replaced it. Do you still remember the ping-pong balls? And did the whole family sit down together at number 27 for the biggest show of the week? Number 27, The Ed Sullivan Show every Sunday at 8. Sunday nights at 8 o'clock CBS aired the single most important television show of the 50s, The Ed Sullivan Show, hosted by a stiff former newspaper columnist named Ed Sullivan, who could not sing or dance or tell a joke, but who somehow understood exactly what the American public wanted to see. His show was a variety hour, and every Sunday he presented a mix of opera singers, comedians, animal acts, circus performers, ballerinas, magicians, Broadway show numbers, and pop music. Elvis Presley on Sullivan in 1956 was the moment American television and rock and roll collided. The Beatles on Sullivan in 1964 changed music forever, but every Sunday for 23 years, from 1948 to 1971, The Sullivan Show delivered the current biggest thing in American entertainment to a family living room. The whole country watched. Sullivan himself was famously wooden. His famous line, "We have a really big show tonight," was mocked by every comedian in America for decades. But he had the eye. He booked Ella Fitzgerald and Nat King Cole and Louis Armstrong when other networks would not, breaking color lines that were still hard. He booked stand-up comedians and helped launch careers. He booked Topo Gigio, the Italian mouse puppet, dozens of times. The good of Sullivan was that he was the American living room's connection to everything that mattered in show business. The hard was the wooden host himself, but even the woodenness became a running national joke that everyone shared. Do you still remember your favorite Sullivan act? And did Lucy at number 26 ever get out of another crazy scheme in one piece? Number 26, I Love Lucy Monday Nights. Monday nights at 9 o'clock CBS aired 30 minutes of Lucille Ball turning her real-life marriage to Cuban bandleader Desi Arnaz into the funniest television ever made. I Love Lucy ran from 1951 to 1957 and pretty much invented the modern television sitcom. It was filmed on 35mm film in front of a live studio audience, with 3 cameras running at once, and Desi's insistence on that setup created both the modern rerun industry and the visual language of the sitcom that dominates television to this day. Lucy was a housewife who wanted more from life and constantly cooked up ridiculous schemes to break into show business, with her best friend Ethel Mertz, played by Vivian Vance. Every week Ricky came home and yelled, "Lucy, you got some splainin' to do." The Chocolate Factory episode, the Grape Stomping episode, the Vide Matev Gammon episode. The whole country memorized them. When Lucy gave birth to little Ricky on the show in 1953, 44 million Americans watched, more than watched the inauguration of Dwight Eisenhower the next day. The show broke ground everywhere it went. Lucy and Desi were the first mixed-nationality married couple on network television. Lucy was pregnant on the air when almost no other pregnancy was shown. The 3-camera format and the live audience laugh track came out of this show and are still used today. The good of I Love Lucy was that it was funny in a way that has almost no expiration date. Reruns still make people laugh. The hard was that the pace of the marriage between Lucy and Desi burned out by 1960 and they divorced. Do you still remember your favorite Lucy scene? And did the Cleaver family at number 25 feel a little bit like your own? Number 25, Leave It to Beaver. Leave It to Beaver ran from 1957 to 1963 on CBS and then ABC, and it followed the small daily life of Theodore Cleaver, a normal boy of about 8 years old, and his older brother Wally, his father Ward, and his mother June. The show was written from the child's point of view, which was unusual for television at the time. Beaver got in trouble with his teacher. Beaver lost his allowance. Beaver's friend Larry Mondello led him into scrapes. Beaver climbed up on a billboard and got stuck. Beaver flushed something down the toilet that shouldn't have gone. Wally handled the teenage side of things with his friend Eddie Haskell, television's most immortal suck-up, whose greeting to Mrs. Cleaver always started with, "My, that's a lovely dress you're wearing today." The show was gentle. Nobody was ever really in danger. Every problem was worked through by supper time. Ward and June sat down with the boys and talked things over with patience and love. It became, in later years, the emblem of an idealized 50s American family, and critics debated whether that image had ever been real. What was real was the writing, which took children's problems seriously and never made fun of them. The good of Beaver was the respect it showed for the small emotional world of a young boy. The hard was that not every family in America looked like the Cleavers, and the show made some families feel like they were failing. Reruns of Leave It to Beaver still air today. Do you still remember an episode that made you laugh? And did the father in the sweater at number 24 always seem to have the right answer? Number 24, Father Knows Best. Father Knows Best ran from 1954 to 1960 on CBS and NBC, and starred Robert Young as Jim Anderson, an insurance salesman in the fictional town of Springfield, and his wife Margaret, played by Jane Wyatt, and their 3 children Betty, Bud, and Kathy. Every week Jim came home from work in his cardigan sweater, hung up his hat, and dealt with whatever small crisis one of his children had brought home from school that day. Betty had a crush on the wrong boy. Bud struck out in a big baseball game. Kitten, as Kathy was called, was afraid of the new neighbor's dog. Jim always had time. Jim always had patience. Jim always had the exact right story from his own childhood that made everything click into place. And by the end of the 28 minutes, the problem was solved, and everyone had grown a little wiser. The title of the show became the shorthand for a whole era of American family life. Father Knew Best. The father was the wise center of the household. The mother tended the home, the children learned. Whether that model was accurate or not, the show projected it into 30 million living rooms every week. The good of Father Knows Best was the calm, the gentle wisdom, the sense that a family working together could handle any small storm. The hard, in hindsight, was that real fathers in real families were not always so wise, and the show set a bar that a lot of dads could never live up to. Reruns aired for decades, and the show shaped how a generation thought about family life. Do you still remember your favorite Anderson episode? And did the cartoons at number 23 ever get you out of bed before the parents were awake? Number 23, Saturday morning cartoons before parents woke up. Saturday morning was sacred. You woke up at 6, tiptoed past your parents' closed bedroom door, went downstairs to the living room, turned on the TV with the volume low, and settled onto the floor in your pajamas with a bowl of frosted flakes for 3 hours of animation heaven. All 3 networks ran a full morning of cartoons back to back. Bugs Bunny, Yogi Bear, Rocky and Bullwinkle, Popeye, Woody Woodpecker, Tom and Jerry, Mighty Mouse, Heckle and Jekyll, Deputy Dog, Huckleberry Hound, Quick Draw McGraw, Rough and Ready. The lineup went from 7 to 10, and it was all yours. The commercials were all for cereal and toys, aimed directly at you. Tricks are for kids. Their GRRR read, Silly Rabbit. Every kid in America knew every jingle. Parents slept in. Mothers came down at 9 in their robes and made a proper breakfast. And by 10, the last cartoon was over, and the family day began. The good of Saturday morning cartoons was the pure blissful freedom of it. 3 hours of laughing at your favorite characters, with no interruption from adults. The hard was the sugar rush from too much cereal, and the corner in the rug you wore bare from sitting in the same spot every week. Saturday morning cartoons died a slow death from the 80s onward, as cable delivered cartoons all day, every day, and the network Saturday block lost its magic. Do you still remember your favorite cartoon? And did the family at number 22 pile into the station wagon for the biggest event of the weekend? Number 22. Drive-in movies from the back of the station wagon. Your father pulled the wood-paneled Ford Country Squire into the drive-in on a summer Friday night, just as the sky was turning purple. The parking lot was gravel, and each spot had a metal pole with a heavy speaker on a cord that you unhooked and hung on the driver's side window. He tuned it, adjusted the volume, and rolled the windows down. The screen at the front of the lot was as big as a house. There were 1,500 of these drive-ins operating in America by 1958. Your mother had packed a paper sack full of sandwiches and a thermos of Kool-Aid, so the family did not have to buy anything at the concession stand. But she still gave your father $1 to go get popcorn and hot dogs at intermission, because that was the tradition. The little kids were in pajamas already, because they would fall asleep before the second feature. The double bill on the screen tonight was Creature from the Black Lagoon and The Blob, and the whole family watched from the front seat and the back seat, and the flat cargo area of the station wagon where a couple of quilts had been spread. Teenagers watched from other cars, and everyone knew that not everyone in those cars was actually watching the movie. The good of the drive-in was that it was the perfect family outing on a summer night. Cheap, fun, outdoors, everyone welcome. The hard was the mosquitoes, the tinny speaker sound, and the babies who cried when the monster came on the screen. Drive-in theaters peaked in 1958 and slowly disappeared through the 70s and 80s. A few hundred are left today. Do you still remember your first drive-in movie? And did the man at number 21 shake your parents up when he swiveled his hips at the microphone? Number 21. Elvis on Ed Sullivan filmed from the waist up. On September 9, 1956, Elvis Presley appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show for the first time, and 60 million Americans, more than 80% of the entire television audience, watched him sing "Don't Be Cruel and Love Me Tender." He was already a national scandal by that point. His shows in Milwaukee and Jacksonville had featured hip movements that ministers had denounced from every pulpit in America. Sullivan had originally sworn he would never book Elvis, then paid him $50,000 for 3 appearances. After his ratings plunged against Steve Allen, who had booked Elvis first, Elvis came on. Sullivan was in the hospital recovering from a car accident, so Charles Lafton hosted the first night. Elvis sang. Girls in the studio audience screamed. By the third appearance in January of 1957, CBS made the decision that when Elvis performed his more suggestive numbers, the cameraman would frame him from the waist up so that the offending hip movements would not be visible on the family television screen. Every American teenager knew what was being hidden, and every American parent was grateful. That decision to shoot Elvis from the waist up became the single most famous image of censorship in American entertainment. The good of Elvis on Sullivan was that it introduced rock and roll to middle America in a controlled setting, and it gave a generation of teenagers a hero. The hard was that adults were terrified, sermons were preached, records were burned. Do you still remember watching him for the first time? And did the radio at number 20 spin the records of the men who invented rock and roll on your bedside table? Number 20. Buddy Holly, Chuck Berry, and Little Richard on the radio. The transistor radio came into American life in 1954, and it changed everything. Suddenly, a teenager could carry music with him wherever he went, and the music that came out of that little brown plastic speaker was unlike anything American parents had ever heard. Buddy Holly and the Crickets from Lubbock, Texas, hit the charts in 1957 with That'll Be the Day and Peggy Sue, and his black-rimmed glasses and hiccup vocal style spawned 100 imitators. Chuck Berry from St. Louis played the guitar like it had been electrified and put out Roll Over Beethoven, Johnny B. Good, and Sweet Little 16 in a run of pure invention that laid the groundwork for every rock guitarist who came after. Little Richard from Macon, Georgia, screamed "A-wop bop-a-loo bop A-lop bam boom" on Tutti Frutti in 1955, and Long Tall Sally in 1956 with a pounding piano and a wild falsetto that broke every rule of what a black entertainer was allowed to do in America. Fats Domino played his New Orleans piano on Blueberry Hill. Bo Diddley thumped his signature beat. Jerry Lee Lewis pounded the piano with his heels. This was the first wave of rock and roll, and it came at teenagers through the transistor radio in a way that adults could not control. The good of the music was that it was a revolution in sound, and it opened American teenagers up to a whole new emotional life. The hard was that Buddy Holly died in a plane crash in Iowa in February 1959, along with Richie Valens and the Big Bopper, in a night that Don McLean would later call the day the music died. Do you still remember the first Chuck Berry song you heard? And did the little yellow adapter at number 19 let you stack records on the spindle for a whole afternoon of listening? Number 19. 45 RPM records with the yellow plastic adapter. The 45 RPM single was introduced by RCA Victor in 1949 as a rival to the older 78 RPM record, and by the 50s, it was the format that ruled pop music. It was 7 inches across, made of thin plastic, and it had a big hole in the middle about 1.5 inches wide. That big hole was the whole design story. RCA thought the wide center would let jukeboxes stack more records for automatic change, and it worked. But to play a 45 on a home turntable that used a smaller 1/4-inch spindle, you needed the yellow plastic adapter, a small starburst-shaped plastic disc that snapped into the big hole and reduced it down to the small size. Every American household with a record player had a jar of yellow adapters. They fell into couch cushions and got vacuumed up and had to be replaced constantly. A 45 held one song on each side, an A-side and a B-side, and the A-side was the hit while the B-side was often a throwaway. You bought them at Woolworths or at the record department of a Sears or a J.C. Penney for 65 cents. The good of the 45 was that it was cheap enough for a teenager to build a whole collection out of his allowance, and it was small enough to fit in a stack next to the record player. The hard was that the little yellow adapters were always missing when you needed one, and the records themselves scratched easily. Do you still have a stack of 45s in the attic? And did the suitcase at number 18 turn every bedroom in America into a dance floor? Number 18. Portable record players in a suitcase. The RCA Victor Victrola in the parlor was a big piece of furniture, but the portable record player was a whole new invention. It was a small suitcase, usually covered in a leatherette in blue or tan or pink, with a handle on top and metal latches on the side. You unlatched it, opened it up, and inside was a turntable, an arm with a needle, a small speaker built into the lid, and a knob for volume. Plug it into the wall, drop a 45 or a 33 RPM album onto the spindle, put the needle down at the edge, and you had music anywhere in the house. Teenagers could take one to a friend's house for a party. A whole album of Elvis or Buddy Holly or Bill Haley could be played in a bedroom or a rec room without disturbing the rest of the family. The sound was small and tinny and monaural, but nobody cared. It was your music in your room whenever you wanted it. The stack of albums you owned grew slowly over years. The Elvis Christmas album. Meet the Beatles when they finally arrived in 1964. Every teenager had a record collection propped up next to the portable player, and the covers themselves became a kind of decor. The good of the portable was the freedom it gave to a teenage listener. Music went with you. The hard was the tinny speaker sound, and the needle that needed replacing every few months. By the late 60s, stereos with big speakers had taken over, and the little suitcase player went to the attic. Do you still remember the color of yours? And did the jukebox at number 17 play your song when you dropped the nickel in? Number 17. Sock hops in the gymnasium. The high school gym on a Friday night in 1957 was strung with crepe paper streamers, and a mirror ball hung from the ceiling, and a portable record player was set up on a folding table at the far end. A teacher chaperone stood in the corner with her arms folded. That was the sock hop. Everyone came in their school shoes and then took them off at the door, because the wooden gym floor could not take the beating of hard-soled shoes, and so the whole dance happened in stocking feet. That was where the name came from. The DJ was usually a senior with a stack of 45s. He played Bill Haley's Rock Around the Clock. He played Buddy Holly's Peggy Sue. He played Elvis. He played the Drifters. He played Chuck Berry. He played the Everly Brothers. He played Little Richard when the chaperones were not paying attention. Slow songs came every 20 minutes, and the whole gym paired up. Fast songs were Jitterbug and Lindy Hop, holdovers from the swing era translated into rock and roll rhythm. The good of the sock hop was that it was a whole generation figuring out how to be teenagers together, and it happened in a supervised safe space that let parents relax a little. The hard was that if you did not have a date to dance with, the 2 hours in the gym could feel like a very long time. Sock hops faded through the 60s as high school dances got fancier, and the sock and the sock hop became a novelty. Do you still remember your first slow dance? And did the poodle skirt at number 16 swirl out around your best friend when she spun on the dance floor? Number 16. Poodle skirts twirling under fluorescent light. The poodle skirt was a wide circle of felt in pastel pink, or mint green or lemon yellow, and stitched onto the front was a small felt applique of a poodle, complete with a rhinestone eye and a leash made of chain stitching. The skirt was invented by a costume designer named Julie Lynn Charlotte in 1947, who could not sew, but who could hand-cut a felt circle without a pattern. And by the middle of the 50s, it was the single most identifiable article of teenage girl clothing in America. Every girl in high school owned at least one, worn with a wide belt cinched tight at the waist, a fitted sweater tucked in on top, bobby socks and saddle shoes below. When you spun on the sock hop dance floor, the wide circle skirt flared straight out around you like a bell, and the poodle rode the current. Some versions had felt appliques of other things: a telephone, a record, a martini glass on the more daring skirts. But the poodle was the classic. Sears sold them by the millions. The good of the poodle skirt was that it was cheap and fun and unmistakably teenage, and it gave girls a look that was neither their mother's dress nor a costume. The hard was that the felt got heavy in humid weather, and the poodle applique sometimes fell off in the wash. Poodle skirts went out of style by the mid-60s as the miniskirt took over, and today the poodle skirt lives on mainly as a Halloween costume. Do you still remember your first one? And did the shoes at number 15 come out of the polished tin, shining every Sunday morning? Number 15. Saddle shoes polished for school pictures. Saddle shoes were low-cut leather Oxfords with a white body and a black or brown leather saddle stitched across the middle over the laces. They had rubber soles and cost around $5 a pair at the shoe store, and every schoolchild in America in the 50s wore them for years. Bass and Spalding were the two big brands. The white leather stayed white for about 3 days after you bought them, and then you spent the rest of the year keeping them presentable with a small tin of Kiwi shoe polish. Every Sunday night after supper, you sat at the kitchen table with your father's polish kit and did your Sunday chore. You cleaned off the scuff marks, wiped the shoes with a damp rag, dabbed white polish on the white parts with a small applicator, dabbed black or brown polish on the saddle, let them dry for 10 minutes, and buffed them to a shine with a soft brush. If you had a big event coming up, a school picture, a birthday party, a first communion, you did the polish job twice. Girls wore saddle shoes with bobby socks folded down. Boys wore them with regular socks. They were the great equalizer of the American schoolyard. Rich kids and poor kids all had the same shoes on their feet. The good of the saddle shoe was that it was durable and classic, and it lasted a whole school year with proper care. The hard was the ongoing polish work, and the black scuff marks that never quite came off completely. Saddle shoes faded from everyday wear through the 60s, but they held on longer in Catholic school uniforms. Do you still remember polishing them on Sunday night? And did the crew cut at number 14 stand straight up with the help of a tin of wax? Number 14. Crew cuts and butch wax. The crew cut on your father's head was cut short with electric clippers up the back and sides, left about an inch long on top, and then stood straight up with the help of a tin of butch wax that he pressed into it every morning before shaving. Butch wax was a stiff yellow petroleum wax packaged in a small round tin about the size of a shoe polish container. You dug out a small dollop with your finger, warmed it in your palm, and worked it through the top hair until every strand stood straight up in a stiff, bristling flat top. The classic look was called the flat top or the crew, and every American man from the boardroom to the barber shop wore some version of it. Boys got the same haircut, and every barbershop in the country charged 50 cents for a boy's cut in 1955. You sat in a booster board across the barber's arms, and he clipped and buzzed and finished with a hot lather at the base of your neck. The whole process took 10 minutes. When it was over, the barber dusted your neck with a soft brush and sent you back to your father with a lollipop. The good of the crew cut was that it was cheap, easy to maintain, and universally acceptable. The hard was that it took a lot of butch wax to stand up right, and if you did it wrong, your hair looked like it was stuck in a wind tunnel. The crew cut lost its dominance in the 60s as longer hair took over, and butch wax slowly disappeared from drugstore shelves. Do you still remember the barber's chair? And did the bobby socks at number 13 come down to your ankle just so? Number 13. Bobby socks folded to the ankle. The bobby sock was a white cotton ankle sock, and the trick was to fold it down neatly into a thick cuff that sat just above the top of your saddle shoe. Every teenage girl in America wore them from about 1943 to about 1963, first with the swing era, and then all the way through the golden age of rock and roll. The name came from a slang word for teenage girls in the 40s, Bobby Soxers. Those were the girls who screamed for Frank Sinatra at the Paramount Theater in New York in 1944, and the name stuck for the whole generation of teens who followed them. In the 50s, bobby socks were worn with poodle skirts, with pedal pushers, with skirts and blouses, with jeans rolled up at the ankle, with just about everything. The classic pair was white, but pink and pale blue and light green versions appeared for special outfits. They cost about 10 cents a pair at the dime store. The proper fold was an art form. Some girls folded once for a thick cuff. Some folded twice for a smaller, neater cuff. Some slouched them down for a casual look. Every girl developed her own preferred method. The good of bobby socks was that they were the perfect complement to a saddle shoe, and they cost almost nothing. The hard was the constant slouching, and the need to refold them every few hours. Bobby socks disappeared from teenage wardrobes in the mid-60s, as pantyhose and tights took over. Do you still remember the perfect fold? And did the pin curls at number 12 keep your hair pinned up all night long under the scarf? Number 12. Pin curls slept in under a scarf. Every Saturday night in America, teenage girls and their mothers went through the pin curl ritual. You washed your hair, toweled it damp, sectioned it off with a rat tail comb, and then wound each small section around your finger into a flat coil, and pinned it flat to your scalp with a bobby pin. 50 pin curls to a head. It took an hour. When you were done, your whole head was a landscape of little coiled discs held down with metal pins, and you tied a silk scarf around the whole thing so the pins would not fall out in your sleep. That was your look for a Saturday evening on the porch swing. On Sunday morning, you got up, unpinned every curl, and brushed the whole thing out into a soft wavy set that lasted through Sunday services and into Monday morning. Rollers were an option, but they were harder to sleep in. Pin curls could be done with just a comb and a jar of bobby pins, and they gave a slightly softer wave than a roller set. The setting lotion was a small tube of pink goo called Dippity-Doo, and every teenage girl kept a jar of it on her dresser. The good of the pin curl set was that it produced a lasting, professional-looking wave for pennies. The hard was the actual sleeping. 50 bobby pins pressed into your scalp for 8 hours meant you tossed and turned all night, and every mother in America woke up with sore red spots on her head. Pin curls faded through the 60s as the beehive and the bouffant took over, and then modern styling tools made them obsolete. Do you still remember your mother pinning your curls? And did your Sunday best at number 11 hang pressed and waiting in your closet from Saturday afternoon? Number 11. Sunday best pressed and hanging Saturday night. Sunday morning was church morning, and every American family in the 50s had a set of Sunday best that lived in the closet all week and came out only for that one occasion. For boys, it was a wool suit, sometimes with short pants until you were about 10, a starched white shirt, a clip-on tie, and polished black shoes. For girls, it was a dress with a full skirt and puffy sleeves and a bow at the waist, a pair of white gloves, patent leather Mary Janes, white anklets, and a small hat pinned to the hair. Your mother wore a hat and gloves, and a modest dress that came just below her knees. Your father wore a suit and tie. On Saturday afternoon, your mother pulled everyone's Sunday clothes out of the closet, pressed anything that needed pressing with her heavy sunbeam iron and a spray bottle of water, checked every shirt for missing buttons, polished every pair of shoes to a mirror shine, and laid everything out on the beds so it would be ready for Sunday morning without a scramble. Nobody left the house on Sunday morning without inspection. Your father checked your tie. Your mother licked her thumb and smoothed down your cowlick. Then you walked or drove together to the church 3 blocks away, and sat in the same pew you sat in every week. The good of Sunday best was the shared discipline of it. A whole community showed up in its best for 1 hour, and everyone felt they had honored the occasion. The hard was the wool suit in July, which no boy ever forgot. Sunday best began to relax in the 70s, as churches went casual and formal dress lost its hold. Do you still remember your Sunday hat? And did the whole family sit down at number 10 around the same table at exactly 6 o'clock every night? Number 10, family dinner at the same time every night. 6 o'clock. That was supper time, and every American family sat down at the same table at the same hour 6 nights a week. Your mother had been cooking since 4. The kitchen filled with the smell of pot roast on Monday, meatloaf on Tuesday, chicken on Wednesday, spaghetti on Thursday, fish on Friday because that was still the Catholic day of abstinence, and it had become a national habit even in Protestant homes. On Saturday it was hot dogs or hamburgers. On Sunday it was the big roast after church. Your father came in from work at 5:30. He kissed your mother, changed out of his suit jacket, sat down at the head of the table, and read the evening paper while she finished the last things at the stove. At 6 sharp everyone sat down. Grace was said. Plates were passed. Nobody left the table until everyone was done and excused. There was no television on. There were no phones. There was no music. There was just the family talking about the day. Your father asked about school. Your mother told a story about the neighbor. Your little brother spilled his milk. You cleared the table with your older sister and helped wash the dishes. The good of the family dinner was the daily rhythm of it, the assumed togetherness, the fact that every night the family gathered and reported in on the day. The hard was that if you had a bad day at school, you had nowhere to hide. And if the conversation went the wrong direction, it could not be avoided. Family dinner as a nightly institution faded from the 70s onward, as two-parent working households became the norm, and children's activities scattered the evening hours. Do you still remember the sound of the dishes being cleared? And did you bow your head at number 9 before every plate went cold? Number 9, Grace said before every meal. Nobody picked up a fork until grace had been said. In some houses your father said it. In some houses your mother said it. In some houses each child took a turn saying it. Bless us, O Lord, for these thy gifts, which we are about to receive from thy bounty, through Christ our Lord. Amen. That was the Catholic grace, said in one long breath by children who had memorized it at age 3. God is great, God is good, let us thank him for our food. That was the Protestant grace for young children, easy enough for a toddler in a high chair. In Jewish homes, the blessing was said in Hebrew over the bread. Baruch Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam hamatzi lechem min haaretz. Every religious tradition had its version, and every American family in the 50s said something before the meal. Even in homes that were not particularly religious, grace was said out of habit or respect or gratitude. Heads bowed, eyes closed, hands folded in the lap or reached across to hold the hand of the person next to you. On Sundays and holidays, the grace was longer and included specific thanks. On weeknights it was quick and rote. Grandma was the one who insisted on it when she came to visit, and everyone rolled their eyes but nobody said no. The good of grace was that it was a small daily ritual of gratitude, a pause before the meal that acknowledged the food was not automatic, and the people at the table were not to be taken for granted. The hard was that on the nights you were starving and the pot roast was in front of you, grace felt too long. Grace faded from many American tables from the 60s on. Do you still remember your family's version? And did your father settle into the same chair at number 8 the same time every night? Number 8, Dad reading the evening paper in his chair. Your father came home from work at 5:30 sharp. He walked in the front door, kissed your mother on the cheek in the kitchen, hung his hat on the hall rack, took off his suit jacket and draped it over the back of a chair, loosened his tie and walked to his chair. That was Dad's chair. It was a big overstuffed armchair in the corner of the living room next to the reading lamp, and no one else in the family sat in it. Your mother handed him the evening paper as he sat down, and he opened it up in front of him and read the front page for 15 minutes while she finished supper. If you needed to talk to your father, this was the wrong time. If you needed to ask him a question, this was the wrong time. This was his 15 minutes to shift from work mode to home mode, and every mother in America enforced the rule. Then he folded the paper, called out that supper smelled good, and came into the kitchen to help carry things to the table. After supper, he went back to the chair for the news at 7, and he stayed there for the rest of the evening reading and watching TV until bedtime. The evening paper cost a nickel and carried the day's baseball scores and closing stock prices. The good of the chair and the paper was the ritual, the small, quiet daily transition from work to family. The hard was that if you were a child who wanted your father's attention right when he walked in, you had to wait. The evening paper faded from American life through the 80s as television news took over, and afternoon papers folded one by one. Do you still remember your father's chair? And did your mother's apron at number 7 have flour ground into the pockets from a whole week of baking? Number 7. Mom in an apron at the stove. Your mother wore a full apron over her house dress all day long, and it was one of the most emblematic images of the American 50s. The apron was cotton, printed with cherries or roosters or ivy vines, tied around her waist with a big bow in the back, with 2 big pockets in the front where she kept a paring knife, a wooden clothespin, a folded dish towel, and whatever else she needed on the move. The apron protected her dress from the flour and the grease and the tomato splatter, and it caught the tears when the news was bad, and it wiped the noses of the youngest children when they came running to the kitchen crying. Your mother was in that apron from 6 in the morning to 8 at night. She cooked breakfast in it. She scrubbed the floor in it. She hung the laundry on the line in it. She stood at the stove stirring the gravy in it. She kneaded bread in it on Saturday morning. When your father's boss came to dinner, she took it off and put on a fancier one, and hung the everyday one in the pantry until he left. The good of the apron was that it was a working uniform, and your mother wore it with practical pride. She was the manager of the household, and the apron was her business suit. The hard was what the apron represented: the endless hours of unpaid labor, the assumption that the whole domestic realm was one woman's job. The apron faded from American kitchens through the 60s and 70s, as more women worked outside the home and kitchen roles shifted. Do you still remember the pattern on your mother's? And did the milkman at number 6 climb your porch steps before the sun was up on every winter morning? Number 6. The milkman leaving glass bottles on the porch. Before dawn every morning, the milkman came up your front walk with a metal crate full of glass quart bottles, clinking gently against each other. He was in a white uniform with a bow tie and a small build cap, and he had been up since 4 making his rounds along a route he knew by heart. He set the fresh bottles down inside the small insulated metal box on your front porch, took the empties from the box, marked your order card, and moved on to the next house without ever ringing the bell. In winter, the milk sometimes froze in the bottles overnight and pushed the paper cap up an inch out of the bottle, so that when you brought it in, the cream on top was in a little frozen tower above the glass. Your mother snapped it off, put it in a small dish, and served it in her coffee. The milk was whole, unhomogenized. The cream rose to the top and had to be shaken back into the milk before pouring, or spooned off and used separately if you wanted. Orange juice and butter and eggs, and sometimes cottage cheese were also delivered. The milkman knew every family on his route by name. The good of the milkman was the reliability, the fresh, cold milk on the porch every morning, and the personal service. The hard was the winter dawn deliveries in 20 below weather, and the price, which was slightly higher than the grocery store. Grocery stores took over milk sales through the 60s and 70s, and by 1975, the milkman had almost disappeared. Do you still remember the clink of those bottles? And did your family pile into the car at number 5 without a single seat belt in sight? Number 5. Riding piled into the back of the Chevy without a seat belt in sight. Seat belts did not become standard equipment in American cars until 1964, and they did not become required for all passengers until decades later. In the 50s, there were no seat belts anywhere, and there were no car seats for babies. When your family took a Sunday drive, everyone piled into the car and sat wherever there was room. Your mother sat up front with the baby on her lap. Your father drove with one hand on the wheel and one arm out the open window. You and your brothers and sisters climbed into the back seat, sometimes 3 or 4 across. And if it was a station wagon, the youngest kids often rode in the flat cargo area behind the back seat, where they could lie down and look out the back window. On long trips, little kids slept curled up on the floor between the front and back seats. On short trips, they knelt on the seat and looked out the window with their chins on the frame. If your father had to brake hard, his right arm shot across your mother's chest to hold her in place, and that arm was known in every household as the mom bar. Nobody thought any of this was dangerous. Cars were seen as safe, speeds were lower, traffic was lighter, highways were still being built. The good of car travel in the 50s was the sense of freedom, the informal comfort of a full family in a big car with the windows down. The hard, in retrospect, was the actual danger. Accidents that were survivable then would be fatal today, and vice versa. Seat belts gradually became mandatory through the 60s and 70s. Do you still remember lying flat in the back of the wagon looking up at the sky? And did your father take you on a Sunday drive at number 4 with no particular destination in mind? Number 4. Sunday drives with no particular place to go. Sunday afternoon in the 50s was drive time. After church and Sunday dinner, your father backed the Chevy out of the driveway, and the whole family piled in for a Sunday drive. There was no destination. That was the point. You drove out into the countryside, or over to the next town, or up to the lake, or through a neighborhood you had never seen before, just to see what was there. Your father pointed out interesting houses. Your mother packed a small picnic in a wicker basket in case you got hungry. The kids in the back looked out the windows and made observations about every farm and every store and every car you passed. Sometimes you stopped at a roadside stand for corn on the cob or a paper cone of ice cream. Sometimes you stopped at a scenic overlook and got out to stretch. Sometimes you drove past a factory and your father explained what they made there. The Sunday drive was part family time, part exploration, part transportation of last resort for a car that had been parked all week. Gas was 25 cents a gallon, and a full tank cost $3. Nobody worried about the environment. Nobody worried about traffic, because there was almost none on Sunday afternoons. The good of the Sunday drive was the unhurried togetherness of it, the freedom of moving through the world with no schedule and no plan, and the small discoveries along the way. The hard was that the youngest kids always got carsick, and every family drove with an emergency paper bag in the glove compartment. Sunday drives faded through the 70s as gas prices climbed, and Sunday commerce opened up. Do you still remember your favorite Sunday drive? And did the whole block at number 3 keep an eye on you the way your own mother did? Number 3, the whole neighborhood watching out for every kid on the block. You could be 6 years old in 1957 and walk 2 blocks to the corner store for penny candy, and every adult on those 2 blocks knew who you were and would have called your mother if you had stepped out of line. That was the neighborhood in the 50s. Nobody locked their doors. Nobody worried about a stranger. Nobody thought a small child on his own posed any risk to himself, because the whole block was raising you together. Mrs. Kowalski on the corner watched from her front porch and knew when the little Hanson boy walked past. Mr. Peterson across the street knew that the Miller girls got home from school at 3:15. Old Mr. Mickelson 2 doors down would step out into his yard to bandage a scraped knee and send you home. If you broke a rule at another kid's house, that mother would spank you first and then walk you home to be spanked again by your own mother. And nobody complained because that was how it worked. Neighbors sat on their front porches in the evening and knew each other by name. They watched each other's houses when families went on vacation. They brought meals over when there was a baby or a death. They lent tools and shared garden vegetables and cared. The good of the neighborhood was the deep social safety net, woven from 1,000 small acts of watching. Every child had 100 backup parents. The hard was the loss of privacy and the moralizing of neighbors who thought your family should live a certain way. The neighborhood watched change through the 70s as more mothers worked, as air conditioning drove people inside, and as television replaced the porch swing. Do you still remember the neighbor who watched out for you? And did the screen door at number 2 slam behind you every summer morning when you ran outside to play? Number 2, The screen door slamming behind you as you ran out to play. The wooden screen door at the back of your house had a metal handle and a stretched spring that pulled it closed automatically, and when it slammed shut, it made a specific sound that every child of the 50s can still hear in his memory. A single sharp wooden crack against the frame, then a soft rebound as the spring caught it and eased it flat against the jamb, then silence. That was the sound of childhood. You came thundering down the back stairs on a summer morning in your pajamas, pushed through the screen door with both hands, let it slam behind you, and were out in the sunshine of the backyard before your mother had turned around from the sink. She would yell after you not to slam the door, but she was yelling into an empty kitchen because you were already in the driveway getting on your bike, and the screen door swinging shut was the last thing she heard from you until lunchtime. The screen door was the border between two worlds. Inside was your mother and the house and the rules. Outside was the whole neighborhood and the day and the sky. You crossed that border a dozen times a day all summer long, and every crossing was announced by that wooden crack. In the evening when your mother called you home for supper, the screen door slammed the other direction. In and out from morning till bedtime. The good of the screen door was what it symbolized, the free passage between the safe home and the wide free world. The hard is that it is gone from most modern houses now, replaced with heavy solid doors that lock tight. That specific sound is a sound most children today will never know. Do you still hear it? And can you hear the voice at number 1 calling you home when the streetlights first came on? Number 1. The sound of your mother's voice calling you home when the streetlights came on. The streetlights on your block came on at almost the same moment every summer evening. First the one at the corner, then the one halfway down, then the one in front of your house. The sky was still light blue in the west and pink over the roofs, but the yellow glow of the lamps began to pool on the sidewalks, and every child on the block knew what that meant. Supper time was over. The game of kick the can was in its final round. The Kool-Aid stand had been folded up an hour ago. The little kids had already been called in. You were still out, running, laughing, playing, holding on to the day as long as you possibly could. Then a screen door opened somewhere down the block, and a voice came out into the summer air. Your mother's voice. She called your name once, then twice, then a third time with a slight edge in it that meant business. It carried across 3 backyards and a driveway and a hedge, and reached you exactly where you were, wherever you were, because you had been listening for it without knowing you were. You dropped whatever you were doing. You said quick goodbyes to your friends. You ran home in the last light, up the front walk, up the porch steps, through the screen door with a final slam into the kitchen, where your mother was standing at the sink with the yellow light overhead, and the smell of the meal she had made you still hanging in the room. Wash your hands, sit down, eat, then bath and bed and tomorrow all over again. That voice calling you home was the safest sound in the world. It meant somebody was waiting. It meant supper was ready. It meant a bed with clean sheets and a light left on. It meant you belonged somewhere. It meant you were loved. Every kid who grew up in the 50s knows that voice. And if your mother is gone now, you would give anything in the world to hear it call your name across the summer twilight one more time. That is the whole of it. That is why we come back to these memories. Not because the toys were better or the shows were funnier or the candy was cheaper, though maybe they were. We come back because there was a voice that called us home, and we were somebody's child, and the whole world was small enough to fit between our house and the streetlight at the corner. If a memory in this walk brought your mother's voice back to you tonight, or your father's chair, or the sound of the screen door, or the taste of a cherry Coke at the counter, share it in the comments below. Tell us the one that hit you hardest. Tell us the one we missed. Tell us your own memory from the block where you grew up. Your children and grandchildren need to hear these stories from you, in your words, in your voice. And if this journey meant something to you,